So how are you guys? I am back again with a very fun and exciting new video, which is what if Naruto finally cracked the Fuinjutsu formula hidden along the handle to surprising. Before part 1 started, do like, share and subscribe to the channel and comment down your favorite part. Your one like and one subscribe motivate me to upload more fanfic like these for you all. So without any waste of time, now let's start the fanfic.
And Anbu knelt before the Hokage awaiting his orders. Outside, the Hokage's face was a perfect mask. One he had built from years of experience that betrayed no trace of emotion or thoughts. Inside, he mentally sighed as he stared at the perfect soldier kneeling before him. Thank you, Kitsune. Make sure to take at least a week of rest before returning for active duty. After a moment of silence, the Hokage followed up with, and no, that was not a recommendation. It was an order. If you insist, Hokage-sama, Kitsune obediently replied. The Hokage had to resist the urge to shake his head at the near-mindless response. While he was an impeccable soldier, Kitsune was not what one would call a social person. For years, the old man had tried to coerce him into fraternizing with others his age, but he would be shot down. It saddened him to see someone, whom he'd practically raised from a young boy, become so alone. It still astounded him how vicious the boy had turned out. Even amongst other Anbu, who were considered the deadliest in the village, it was uncommon to take A rank after A rank missions, only pausing to take an occasional S rank. It truly was a shame Itachi had left so early. What they could have accomplished together would have been staggering. It felt like only yesterday when Hiraishin had stumbled upon the boy breaking into the Sarutobi complex. The Anbu would never have even noticed him if the Hokage hadn't headed down to the storage room for a late-night snack. As he creaked open the door, the boy simply froze and did nothing but stare back at the surprised, old man. The boy's face had been covered in dirt, and his clothes had been caked in dried mud. He was just a clan-less orphan with nothing but the clothes on his body and thin scroll on his back. It was so silent that the old man could hear the boy's heart throbbing in his chest in fear. He had offered him a kind smile to put him at ease, before walking towards him. The moment he moved, the boy dropped everything and turned to bolt from the scene. He barely made it 3 steps before he was stopped by the Anbu that followed the Sandaime at all times. The blonde-haired boy struggled to free his arms, and his thrashing only grew worse as the old man drew closer. The Hokage had knelt before him and offered him a smile, before waving off the guards. The boy rubbed his wrist as he desperately tried to stare anywhere but into the old man's eyes. He was surprised when the man ruffled his hair, and offered him the burlap sack of food he had dropped in his haste to escape. The boy could only stare dumbstruck with awe, when the Hokage offered him a place to sleep. Ever since that night, the boy had clung to him at the hip, as much as the Anbu would allow. He had immediately made a request to enlist as a shinobi, and the rest was history. All but adopted by the head of Anbu at the time, he spent every waking moment of his time studying, training, and pushing his body to the limit in order to serve the man, who had shown such kindness. He was precise, vicious, and had a mind as sharp as his blade. Yes, Anbu had crafted their perfect little monster, yet it saddened the old man to see such a level of commitment that prevented the boy from having his own life. That will be all, Kitsune. You are dismissed, the Hokage sighed. Kitsune nodded and headed for the door. As he reached for the handle, the door slammed open and erased a blur of yellow and orange. Hey Gigi. A smile crept across the old man's face as his other young charge sped towards him like a bolt of lightning. Equally as quick, Kitsune snatched up the young boy and held him by the collar of his shirt. No fair, Fox Baka. Let me go. The young boy cried out as he squirmed for release from the older boy's grasp. Their interactions never ceased to amuse the old man. No one else had the gall to insult Kitsune right to his face. Naruto, please be more respectful to Kitsune. You know he is just doing his job. Besides, you wouldn't want to irritate him on accident. The lump of blonde hair crossed his arms and pouted. Like I care. He's not that great. If it wasn't for the fact that he's taller than me, I'd kick his ass. The masked boy made no response, but the old man could tell from his body language that he was smirking underneath his mask. Naruto seemed to be only one that could elicit that kind of response from him. I'm sure, the old man responded with a smirk. Now Naruto, what are you doing here? If I'm not mistaken, classes have not been let out yet, and I'm sure Iruka would be disappointed to find out that you have been skipping again. The 8-year-old boy blushed and at least looked a little ashamed before replying, "He's sick today and some other guy is teaching. He made me sit in the hall and wouldn't let me back in. I didn't do anything, Gigi, this time. I promise." A frown found its way across the Sandame's faces. Once again, another teacher at the academy acted out against the young boy. It had become a reoccurring theme over the past few months no matter how much he threatened the staff of the academy. He couldn't just send Anbu agents to watch the class to keep them in line. Misuse of resources for personal reasons aside, it would be difficult to explain to clan heads why there were suddenly Anbu agents stationed around the classroom filled with so many of their future heirs, when the teachers were supposed to be vetted for their protection already. It was starting to affect the boy's grades, and he knew it would only get worse. He inwardly shook his head at the fools that acted against the boy. If he were any other student, they would have been overjoyed to have such a studious child. One day, the young boy had wandered into his office out of boredom. The Hokage had been out in a meeting, but the blonde had found another way to entertain himself. When his meeting was finished, he surprised to walk in and find the boy entrenched in one of the Fuinjutsu books he kept in his bookshelf. To say that he and his guards were on edge would be an understatement. It went without saying that watching a Jinchuriki meddle with Fuinjutsu was beyond stressful. When asked why he chose that particular book, the boy had gazed up at him and simply replied it was because the swirl symbol on cover was the same as the one on all of his shirts. With that simple explanation, he and the guards stationed around the room had let out a sigh of relief. Sarutobi knew Naruto was not the kind of person to enjoy sitting still or reading, so to see the boy so calm and focused, on a book of all things, was nothing short of astonishing. After a short debate in his head, he had gladly lent the boy the book, and a week later the boy returned asking for the next volume. This continued on, and now the boy was starting to exhaust the beginner Fuinjutsu books that he kept in his office. The Sandame stopped his trip down memory lane and turned his attention back to the young boy in front of him. "I'm sorry to hear that, Naruto. Do you want Kitsune to go with you to talk with the teacher into letting you back in?" The boy shook his head vigorously. "Nah, he's just a boring old coot anyway. I'd rather you teach me some awesome jutsu instead. Come on, Gigi, please." The old man chuckled as he replied, "I'm sorry, Naruto, but I'm busy as it is," motioning to the mountain of paper that littered his desk and the ground around him. "Maybe in a week or two we can schedule a day for just the two of us, or, at the very least, free up some time for some ramen." The young boy's eyes lit up in excitement, and his sound of approval echoed off the walls of the room. "Kitsune, please escort Naruto back to the academy and, while you're there, ensure that the teacher is aware of my displeasure of the situation." Over Naruto's sounds of disappointment, Kitsune nodded, understanding the message. "And before you go back, maybe just show a little something to Naruto to appease his curiosity." Naruto perked up again. "Do you mean it? Only if you promise to behave yourself until Iruka returns from his leave," replied the Sandame with a serious expression. "You got it, Gigi. And I never break a promise." He chuckled at the verbal tick as he waved Kitsune, who was still holding the boy by his collar, out of his office. He continued to hear the boy's muffled screams for release as they made their way down the hall. He sighed and leaned back into his chair. Naruto was always a breath of fresh air, and it was good for Kitsune to show at least some emotion. Naruto was someone who refused to be ignored and demanded attention. When Naruto had first met Kitsune, he refused to stop bugging the teenager about how his mosque's whisker marks were similar to his own. After a nasty run-in with some drunk villagers, Kitsune had intervened on Naruto's behalf and they had taken to each other immediately afterwards. As similar as the two were, Hiraishin reflected upon how they would follow different paths. Kitsune was a perfect example of what Naruto would have turned into had Danzo gotten his hands on him. A perfect, lethal, empty shell of a person with nothing but loyalty to the village. Naruto was too bright and cheerful for that. Hiraishin was content his decision to keep the boy from starting his career too early. He already had the guilt of one child soldier on his conscience, and he didn't want to add another. He made one final gaze at the fourth picture hanging on his wall of a mop of golden hair, before resigning himself back to the paper stacked in front of him. Naruto was so happy he could almost skip as he made his way through Konoha. He would never actually skip, no never, for that wasn't very shinobi-like. No sir. But he was so excited he couldn't help but at least giggle. He had finally done it. He had made his way through Gigi's library of beginner Fuinjutsu books, and now, he held a new, blue book under his arm. He could finally start moving on to the advanced stuff. His mood slightly soured, and he made a tiny pout. Well, not really the advanced stuff. Gigi had said he still had to move on to the medium-level books, but hey, that was still an improvement. His determination back in his eyes, he vowed to be the best ninja in the village at Fuinjutsu, just like the Yondaime was before him. Though he would never admit it, Naruto was very self-conscious when it came to his own talent. Sure, he liked to talk big and would fight tooth and nail to back it up, but whenever he had to compare himself to the likes of Sasuke or even Kitsune, he would feel disappointed in his own ability. Not for a lack of trying. He would spend hours trying to mimic what Nei-chan and Kitsune-san would teach him, but he still felt as though he was coming up short. The fact that he had advanced to his current level of Fuinjutsu all by himself made him beam and swell with pride. He had become entranced the second he'd laid his eyes on that book in Gigi's office. He still didn't know what it was, but something about seals just clicked with him. It was exhilarating to finally find something he was good at, but when he learned in class that his hero, the Yondaime, was also a seal master, it was just even better. Naruto couldn't help but snicker at the memory of the teacher's face when Kitsune had arrived. With him back at the academy a few weeks ago, he had never seen anyone's face turn that pale before. He had forgotten what kind of effect Kitsune's presence tended to have on other people. He always forgot how big a deal he was due to the way he treated him. Kitsune would always take the time to listen to him, and he'd always rub his hair when he left. At first it bugged him like it would with any other kid, but he eventually grew fond of the sign of affection and looked forward to it, although he would never admit it. So there he was, not skipping, clutching his first, grade 2 Fuinjutsu book under his arm. All the while ignoring the angry stares and whispers that would erupt as he passed by. It was the weekend and Iruka had decided to cut the class some slack by not giving them any homework. Now with all this free time, he made his way towards his second favorite spot in the village. It was too hot today to sit on the rocky head of the Hokage monument. Instead, he headed out towards the training grounds Kitsune had shown him once or twice. As he entered training ground 7, he headed off towards the opposite edge of the clearing sheltered under the shade of the looming trees. He kept strolling until he finally found a place that satisfied him and popped a squat. Easing back against the roots, he excitedly tore open his new book. His excitement quickly bettered out when he saw nothing but a blank page. His eyebrows burrowed in confusion, and his heart started to sink as he skimmed through the rest of the book to find that all of the pages were blank. What was going on? Gigi wouldn't just give him an empty book. He bet it was that new receptionist. She must have done something to switch the covers. But she had seemed so nice to him before. He turned back to the beginning and found a letter taped to the inside cover. Naruto peeled it off as easily as he could without damaging the book and proceeded to rip open the letter. He skimmed through the message before groaning and slumping back against the tree. Dear Naruto, I want to congratulate you for finally completing the beginner class series. I am very proud of you and glad to see you're taking a more serious approach to your education. I apologize for not being able to give you your next volume in person. I am needed in a meeting with the Fire Daimyo in the capital for the next week. So Kitsune and I will be unable to congratulate you on your accomplishment in person. Kitsune is also proud of you in his own way. I took his grunt when I mentioned your accomplishment as a sign of approval. By now you are probably wondering why your current book is blank. Consider it a test. I don't claim to be an expert seal master, but I'd like to think that I know my way around the trade. I do know that all seal masters go through a series of tests upon completing each level, and since Konoha is rather lacking in that department, I thought I'd give you a mock test, until a true expert can come to test your abilities. Your challenge is simply to unlock your new book. All you have to do is remove the seal from the first page. Think of it as a culmination of everything you have learned so far. Before you get any ideas in that empty head of yours, don't think about simply tearing the page with the test on it. All that will do is activate a security seal and spit out an enormous amount of ink, drenching both you and the book's pages. I know you can crack this if you put your head to it. Good luck and I will see you soon. Hiraishin Sarutobi. Naruto was filled with a strange combination of annoyance and anticipation. While he was ticked that the old man tricked him, he was also humbled that the old man thought enough of him that he could pass this test. However, a grim realization settled over him as he realized he hadn't brought his sealing kit with him. Kuso, he muttered as he slumped against the tree. He had only been planning to flip through the book and get a hold of the new concepts before starting to take any notes. He hadn't thought to bring his equipment with him. The seal Gigi had placed was only slightly challenging. For his classmates, they would have mistaken the mass of ink blots and symbols as unreadable jargon, but to him it was as clear as day. The big seal on the page was split into 3 parts. The outside of the sphere was a double detection seal that activated whenever the book was opened. This meant that every time he opened the cover, the seal would recognize it and activate the other seals below it. The second part was a quadruple seal split up into 4 parts. One to detect any tear in the page, another acting as a storage seal, most likely filled with ink, yet another that would propel whatever was in the storage seal outwards, and a final part that prevented working on the lower level anti-theft seal until the others were taken care of. The final level was the anti-theft seal, which hid all of the ink from the pages of the book. It also had a timed alarm that would activate the moment someone started working on breaking down the seals. All in all, not too challenging for him, but not exactly a walk in the park. This would take time, concentration, and all of his equipment, which he had left at home. Not resigned to lose his day in the training grounds, he tucked the book under his arm and neatly folded the letter into his pocket, before setting off into the woods. Naruto loved to explore, although the Anbu would never let him when he was little. He understood why they wouldn't let him go. You can't just let a toddler wander off by himself, but his stubborn attitude never let him give up that desire to just see what's out there. The first time he had come here, he had been so excited to discover the multitude of used kunai and shuriken that littered the training ground. When he ventured deeper into the forest, he would only discover more and more kunai lodged into the branches of trees and burn marks left over from fire techniques cast long ago. Naruto had already scavenged most of the stuff left around. He didn't particularly like using partially damaged tools, but it wasn't exactly a choice. With the prices that the shop owners were charging him, it was better to resort to the supplies he would find in the training grounds. Today, Naruto found himself traveling further and further into the woods than he usually went, hoping to find some kunai or shuriken that he may have missed before. After about 45 minutes of walking with no results, he was ready to turn back and head home to unlock his new book. As he turned to leave, a glint of sunlight caught his eye. Up in a tree off to his right, he could make out the metallic gleam of a kunai's handle. Naruto smiled to himself as he set his book down and began clambering up the thick trunk. He slowly inched himself up the bark, until he could finally stand on the wide branch and get a good look at it. The blade was buried hilt deep inside the bark. Naruto took hold of the handle, which was bigger in comparison to the other kunai he had used, and pulled with all of his might. After 3 of 4 tugs, he finally managed to yank out the blade only to discover something different. The hell is this? The blade wasn't shaped like normal kunai. It seemed to have 3 prongs that shot out from the handle. Speaking of which, he had never held a kunai with such a bulky handle. "Aw man, the thing must be broken," he pouted to himself and got ready to chuck it away, when he caught sight of something on the handle. Naruto was no expert, but he certainly recognized an advanced formula when he saw one. He ran his hand along the handle, rubbing over the complex formula he had never seen before. His eyes darted over the kanji, and he couldn't make heads or tails of it. With his limited knowledge, he could only pick up bits and pieces it. This was more advanced than anything he had seen in his books. It was something unknown, and that sent an exhilarating chill down his spine. Now this was what he considered a challenge. While Gigi's seal was complicated for an average beginner, he would have it solved within 15 minutes, maybe 10 if he was really pushed. That would be a breeze considering the security seal was timed to collapse in after an hour. This was something new, and it could possibly take him years to figure out. Never one to back down from a challenge, he tossed the kunai in the air, liking the way it felt compared to others, before making up his mind. A big grin found its way across his face as he slowly made his way back down the tree. He picked up his book and started to make his way back to the village, his eyes never leaving the mysterious formula on the weird kunai. 2 years later, the blonde 10-year-old sat in the middle of the clearing, moving with as much precision he could muster. Slowly and painfully, He weaved and flicked his brush across the parchment, leaving smooth, clean strokes in its wake. He brought his arm down for the final stroke and slowly began to draw the final kanji, all the while pumping as steady a stream of chakra as he could manage. Finally, he finished and gazed upon his work, letting out a sigh of relief. A smile erupted on his face. He opened his mouth to shout, "Yata!" only for the seal to explode in his face, sending him skidding back several yards. "OWW," was all the boy could groan, as he tried to sit up. The entire front of his body stung and his goggles were clouded with soot. He tried to clean them with the back of his hands, as he mentally reprimanded himself. He had left the tip of his brush on the page. When he had grown excited, a surge of chakra had ran through his body and, by extension, through the brush and into the seal, setting it off. He muttered a curse as he dragged his aching body out of the clearing towards the cool shade of the tree line. He leaned back against the tree and winced as he inspected the damage. His hands were bright red, and several blisters were already forming. Could have been worse. He cringed as he remembered the first time he had attempted to make an exploding tag. Of course, he had set it way higher than he should have for a first attempt. The front of his shirt had been burned away, and the flesh on his hands and chest had been completely seared off. That had been a very unpleasant day at the hospital due to his aching body and the scolding he received from the Hokage. Kitsune had dropped by and gave him his signature silent scolding, which was even worse. His aura and stare had made him feel even guiltier than when Iruka had come by. Seeing now as good a time as any, he decided to call a break, at least until his hands stopped feeling like he had grasped a piece of hot metal. He closed his eyes and relished the feeling of the wind racing across his face. He sure was growing more and more busy lately. He barely had any time to appreciate the tiny moments like this. There was just so much he had to do. He had to keep up his pace with his Fuinjutsu studies. By now, he was about halfway through the medium-class books. He also had to keep on top of the lessons that Kitsune and Nei-chan had taught him. Then, he had his own secret projects, which took up most of his time and were extremely difficult. He had one project set aside to help Nei-chan with her own special problem, and another working out the secret of his mystery kunai that he had found in the woods. He absent-mindedly took said kunai out of his pocket and gazed at the handle for what seemed like the millionth time. He had made a lot of progress deciphering it. Well, a lot of progress for a beginner anyways. He had known the thing was complicated when he had first found it, but now that he was halfway through the middle class, he was starting to truly grasp the complexity of the seal formula. When he had first started, it was all just a complicated mess that made his head spin. So, he did what Kitsune had taught him to do when faced with a problem: break it down and solve it by parts. After using a copy seal and expanding the formula onto a larger sheet, he was dumbfounded by the complexity of it. He had barely made his way through 1/4 of the seal and it still barely made any sense. All he had been able to decipher so far was that it had something to do with an equal exchange of matter and energy. He would have mistaken it for a storage seal if it weren't for the lack of the clear indicators found in all storage seals no matter what their size. That plus how dense and complicated the formula was lead him to believe that it had to be something more. However, his grades had started to take a serious dip due to his free time being spent on his own progress. His bunshin was still a mess and no matter what he did, he just couldn't get it. However, this only made him more determined to show off all that he could do with his Fuinjutsu during the exam so that they would overlook his poor bunshin. Not getting anywhere unraveling the mystery of the weird kunai, he sighed and tucked it back in his bag before opening his latest book and waiting for his hands to heal. Near the back west corner of the Hyuga clan's compound was the clan's library. It was a building that towered over the rest of the complex, with multiple levels above and below ground. The first level contained a brightly lit reading area with basic information and resources for anyone in the clan to access. The floor below it was designated specifically for the branch members. While branch members and main family could both access this level, the one directly below it was strictly reserved for the main house families. Below that level was an even smaller level reserved only for main family members who were directly related to the head of the clan. In the back corner of the first floor sat a young, lavender-eyed girl. She was snuggled into a cushion of pillows, poring over yet another story regaling the triumph of the main house over another clan during the times before the hidden villages. Hinata loved reading. When she was younger, her mother would read to her for hours on end. Her soothing voice would always put her at ease and lull her to sleep. She loved this spot due to its quiet atmosphere and distance away from most of the compound. Whenever she got upset or disappointed in herself, she would retreat within the walls of the library and speed through book after book to ignore the pain. While most of the library's contents involved Juyukin techniques and clan history, there were also poems and stories crafted by members of the clan. She loved the poetry from the branch house section especially. They were filled with such passion and emotion that was rare to see up front within the clan's walls. They also made her sad as they were yet another reminder of the harsh divide the cage bird seal was causing the family. Closing another embellished story of a Hyuga victory, the 10-year-old girl made her way back down to the second level to return it to its spot. Today the library was mostly empty. It was growing later into the evening, and people had mostly trickled out. She enjoyed staying for as long as the librarian would allow her, before she would be forced to return to the house. She ran her hand along the wooden bookshelves as she walked down the aisle where she had picked up her book. Finding its spot, she happily sat it back in place and turned to leave. As she started heading towards the stairs, she felt a cold chill flow down her spine. She whipped around scanning the room for anyone else. She started to tremble as no one was in sight. She could have sworn she had heard a whisper, and it had been uncomfortably close to her. Hands shaking, she forced herself to make a seal and activate her Byakugan. The world melted away into black and white as she peered through the bookshelves. Sure enough, the entire floor was empty. The only person lingering in the building was still the librarian sitting at her desk, stamping at paperwork. Her head was telling her to rush up the stairs, but her feet were planted firmly in place. She felt a slight tug in her gut, and she slowly started walking deeper into the room. She kept going deeper and deeper, until she found herself standing at the gated entrance to the third sub-level, which was reserved only for the direct family of the clan head. Her whole body was shaking and wanted to flee, but she steeled herself and thought of an adventurous, young blonde before steeling her resolve. As she passed through the gate, her hand passed over the seal designated to detect and activate the cage bird seal, and her hand unconsciously went to her forehead. She grabbed a candle from the wall and lit it with a low-level fire jutsu. Nothing special, just something taught at the academy to help light fires on missions. She descended down the stairway and creaked open the wooden door to the bottom floor. This was honestly the first time she had ever ventured down here, and she was surprised by how small it was compared to the rest of the building. Even though she had access to it, she had never felt like coming down here. The atmosphere it excluded just reminded her too much of the council. There were fewer scrolls on this floor, but they were still neatly organized and piled on what few shelves there were. The room was full of secret and restricted Juyukin techniques known only to the clan heads and unedited versions of the clan's history. As she ventured through the shelves, she caught sight of a rather large scroll sitting a pedestal. Unlike many of the other scrolls down here, this one was absent of cobwebs and dust. There were very few people with the access to this floor, and none of them would have come here with cleaning on their mind. That would be below their station. To see one in such clean condition shocked her. She ran her fingertip along the kanji for tiger as she felt the same chill from before. She whipped her head around and happened to glimpse the faintest glow disappear behind a wooden door at the end of the room. She tentatively tiptoed inch by inch up to the door. She reached out with her shaking fingers and touched the door handle. Hinata. Her back slammed against the door, and her Byakugan flared to life, darting all across the room. Nothing. Still nothing. Her heart was beating in overtime and every instinct was telling her to run, but she slowly suppressed that feeling and deactivated her eyes. She was going to keep going. She just had this strange obligation to continue. Taking a deep breath, she creaked open the door and peeked inside. Even when she poked her candle through the doorway, she could barely see anything. She creeped down the stone hallway before entering a small round room. It was pitch black and the air felt cold and damp. She glanced up towards the ceiling and was surprised she couldn't see it. Lifting her candle as high as she could, it barely illuminated the walls of the room. She lowered the candle with care and skipped a little to the side as hot wax dripped down its side. As she titled the candle to drip off the rest of the melted wax, she made her way towards the walls. When it finally came into view, she was surprised to discover a white rock with strange engravings. She ran her hand through one of the grooves and started walking to her right. She followed the circular path of the walls, and was surprised to discover that the strange stone encompassed the entire room, aside from the doorway. It rose up about 2 feet above her head, and she faintly make out faded outlines of something on the walls. As she glanced back at the ground, she noticed a spot in the center where the sand had been disturbed. It looked as if someone or many people had stood in that exact spot. She hesitantly walked towards the center and faced the wall opposite of the hallway. Slowly, she raised her hand due to some unknown urge and activated her Byakugan. In an instant, the entire room was visible and it overwhelmed her. The rock wall seemed to light up and the previously illegible markings bombarded her with information, most of which she didn't understand. The walls above the rocks depicted ancient murals and paintings of people resembling the Hyuga praying and guarding over a large white circle in the sky. Her mind was swirling with phrases and images, most of which she couldn't comprehend. Even in her stupor, she was able to catch 1 or 2 phrases from the wall such as, "The will of the moon people," and their "duty to guard." Hinata was confused and fascinated at the same time. This was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was beautiful. It was exhilarating. It was terrifying. She froze when she finally noticed that she was no longer the only one in the room. She slowly turned around to see a white, blurred figure standing in the exit of the hallway. She breath caught in her throat and she began backing away from the figure. With every step she took away from it, it grew closer. She felt her back press against the stone wall, and she curled up into a ball. The blurry, horned figure made incomprehensible sounds as it moved towards her. She closed her eyes and covered her ears as she only picked up bits and pieces. Tears stung her face as she shook in fear. "Help, please, please leave me alone, Hinata." Her eyes shot open, and her father stormed into the room straight through the figure, dispelling it. He crouched down in front of her and she flung herself onto him. He winced at how tight she was gripping his neck as he placed her arms around her back. She was vigorously shaking and muttering something about a ghost. Hiraishin had been beyond shocked. Earlier, he had been meaning to talk to Hinata regarding her training, when he discovered no one in the compound knew where she was. Usually this just meant she was holed up in the library, but when he arrived, he couldn't find her anywhere. As others helped him search, he had activated his Byakugan to discover a major swell of chakra emanating from the main family secret room. The amount of chakra radiating from the room was almost blinding. He forced himself through it and managed to see the outline of his daughter standing in the middle of the room. He raced through the levels of the library and tore across the final floor to see his daughter curled on the floor crying out for help. He himself had stood in this room attempting to decipher the Hyuga ring to no avail, as had every clan head before him. In all of his research and personal experience, he had never seen or heard of anything like this happening before. Away from the eyes of the elders and the rest of the clan, Hiraishin took a rare moment and let his emotions show, as he held his daughter in his arms and tried to calm her. He ran his hand down her hair and back in an attempt to calm her down. It had been years since he had carried her like this. He stood up from the ground and slowly started taking her back out of the chamber. It would be weeks before Hinata would find the courage return to the library. A whole year before she was finally willing to go back down to that level by herself. As her father carried her away, Hinata squeezed his arm and buried her face in his shoulder. It would not be until the next morning that she would discover the small scroll clenched in her hand. The few words she had comprehended from the figure echoed in her mind. "This is just a beginning. Steel yourself. Your first steps must be taken at your own pace. Now, can anyone tell me the name of the Earth Country unit credited for the most damage along the border of Grass and Fire Country during the Third Shinobi War?" Ruruka's eyes wandered the classroom as Sakura's hand shot into the air. "Yes, Sakura. The Crimson Colony," she replied. "Correct. Now, who can tell me why this particular group had this name?" This time both Sakura and Shino's hands were in the air. Ruruka nodded to Shino, who replied in his monotone voice, "This title was due to their control of Solenopsis mandibularis, or fire ants, through a summoning contract." "Very good, Shino. Yes, the Crimson Colony was a very feared group within the Iowa military due to their very useful summons. They could summon ants ranging in size from the tiny variety we have at home to ants the size of small dogs and horses." Many of the students shivered at the prospect. The Crimson Colony used their summons to help move troops underground through a massive system of tunnels. They could traverse the battlefield bringing reinforcements behind enemy lines or alter the terrain by causing potholes below enemy encampments. In close combat, they were especially dangerous due to their bite, which released formic acid into their prey. The larger the ant, the deadlier concentration of acid. However, these are not the reasons why they are credited for severe damage in grass country. Does anyone else know why? Unsurprisingly, Shino's hand was in the air again. When it came to anything involving insects, he and his family were bound to be interested. One particular species among them could raise their core temperature to 2000 degrees Fahrenheit, causing them to glow white. They would march across grass country burning acres of tall grass, making it difficult for enemy forces to hide their movements and for the occupants of the country to aid either side. Very good, Shino. Now, I assume you can tell me the drawbacks of this as well. Shino pushed up his glasses and he said, many insects such as Solenopsis mandibularis take in oxygen through their spiracles on the sides of their bodies. Their ability to raise their core temperature was primarily used to ward off intruders and attackers from their nests. Earth Country's tactic backfired as the smoke generated from the fires clogged up their trachea, leaving them deprived of oxygen. So to complete a massive-scale attack, the ants would have to be sacrificed in the process. Shino finished his speech with a frown. He did not like the waste of insect life on such a large scale. On such a large scale. Uruka nodded as a hand shot up in the air, from the back of the class. Uruka-sensei, if they couldn't be killed by fire, and could just dig their way out of Doden jutsus, how did we beat them? Very good question, Shira. Well, as I'm sure Shino will tell you, the heart of all insect colonies lies with their queen. The details of the mission have been kept secret, but the Crimson Colony's downfall came due to the loss of their queen summon. Without her, new generations of the insects could not be born, and the surviving male soldier ants stopped responding and died. Now, how did this affect the tide of the war? As Uruka went on with his lesson about Earth Country's tactics, 11-year-old Sasuke Uchiha leaned against the window, lazily eyeing a hawk circling outside. He was bored and thankful that this would be his final year at the academy before he could graduate. He had already read over the course material and made plenty of outlines regarding the history class. Truthfully, he found the class incredibly dull. He didn't like to be kept up inside. He wanted to be out learning practical knowledge that would him survive in the world of shinobi. But he could only get so far teaching himself from the taijutsu and ninjutsu scrolls he found in the Uchiha district, and needed someone to help him one-on-one. He knew better than to attempt to move on to the more advanced set of scrolls without help. Especially after the incident when he tried a high-class fire jutsu that exploded in his face, leaving him with burns and a nasty case of chakra exhaustion. He was lucky that a Junin had been returning from training and heard the explosion. A scolding from the Hokage and doctor had taught him a valuable lesson to not try anything too far over his head without some supervision. Still, he had to be stronger. So, he made sure to take his time mastering the basics before moving on to the advanced steps. He could only hope that his sensei was capable enough to help him fulfill his goals. Speaking of which, he turned his attention back to the class as he thought about which of them he would be stuck with as his teammates. Out of all of his classmates, he probably respected the Aburame the most. The two of them weren't friends by any stretch of the imagination, but he was impressed by the boy's calculative mind and skills. Sure, he was quiet and reserved, but then again so was he. It was wishful thinking to think that he would be able to get away with not having a kunoichi placed on his team. He was sick of all of them. He was sick of every last one of them. Always swooning and ogling him everywhere he went. It was annoying. Well, not all of them were like that. He glanced over his shoulder towards the back corner of the room, where a white-eyed girl diligently paid attention to Uruka's every word. No, the Hyuga was not like the rest. He could at least tolerate her. As one would assume from someone of her clan, her taijutsu skills were unmatched by the other girls of class. The only reason he felt that she wasn't the top kunoichi was because of her grades. While there was no denying she was intelligent, Sakura was ahead of her in that department. On top of that, the grade for taijutsu was only based on the academy style and did not take other factors into consideration. The only thing that bugged him about her was her shyness. He didn't know what kind of situation she faced at home, but whatever it was, it had obviously molded her into the withdrawn person she was. The only times he ever saw her come out of her shell was whenever. Naruto. Pay attention. Iruka shouted as he threw his chalk, pegging Naruto in the forehead. OWW, Iruka-sensei, he drawled in a whine, I didn't do anything. That's the problem, Iruka replied as he climbed up the step to his row. What is this? He asked, picking up Naruto's notes. On the piece of paper was a badly drawn doodle of what appeared to be Naruto with kunai in hand as he flew towards a group of large, cartoon ants on fire. Sasuke could only roll his eyes as Iruka started going off on a tangent about making good notes. As he turned his attention away from the bickering duo, he spotted Hinata off in the corner barely controlling her, giggling over the antics of the blonde. Yes, he was the only one she lit up for. It was odd for him to see the only girl in his class that wasn't head over heels for him seemingly pay attention to the class's dead last. Well, he couldn't call him that anymore. Although he would never stop calling him that just to get on the blonde boy's nerves, Sasuke had to admit that Naruto no longer held that position. That title was purely due to his abysmal grades and mistreatment from the teachers. Sasuke wasn't blind. He had seen throughout the years as the teachers and the villagers had shunned and ostracized the boy. They were fools. Sasuke knew firsthand that Naruto wasn't as stupid as other people believed him to be. At first he couldn't believe his eyes, but it would come to pass that Naruto could be found every day at lunch reading a book. Since none of the other kids would let him sit with them, he had taken to sitting by himself off under the tree in the corner of the courtyard. One day, Sasuke had been visiting the shinobi library, when he came across the same books that the dobi always carried with him. The green color and spiral design on the cover could not be mistaken for anything else. Curiosity overcame him as he grabbed the closest volume of the set and opened it. To put it bluntly, he couldn't understand a word of it. He was surprised to say the least that the supposed dead last was studying what was considered by many to be the most complex of the shinobi arts. He wanted to shake off the whole thing as a ploy by the prankster to make himself seem smarter, but one day, he had seen firsthand what the blonde could do as he watched him seal away an old lady's bag of groceries to help lighten her load. No, Naruto may not be the brightest person, but in regards to sealing, Sasuke could tell that he was something special. After his initial surprise and small pang of jealousy, he had quickly shaken it off. Let the goofy idiot meddle with seals. They had never really interested Sasuke in the first place. What really bothered Sasuke about the blonde was neither his aptitude with seals nor his tendency to goof off. No, what truly bothered him was how much the blonde reminded him of his older brother's friend Shisui. This wasn't just because that they both could always be found smiling and had a joking personality. What truly startled him was how fast the blonde was. Now, Kiba was fast. It was one of his strong suits and essential for his feral fighting style. Naruto's speed put his to shame. He didn't know when the change started to happen, but now he actually was starting to find it challenging when he sparred with the blonde. Not because of his fighting style. Kami no. Naruto's fighting style was simply pathetic. He mostly fought like an all-out brawler. There were occasional glimpses of moves and techniques that he was unaware of, but it seemed like he was either just learning a style and trying to incorporate it or just not very adept at it yet. It was obvious when he poorly tried incorporating the Academy Taijutsu style into whatever the hell he was attempting, and it came together in a big sloppy mess. But the boy's sheer speed made up for his ineptitude in technique. He was even faster than he was, though he was loath to admit it. On top of that, the guy just didn't know when to stay down. Whenever he got hit, he just bounced back up like nothing hit him. The only times that Naruto even came remotely close to beating him would be because the blonde would tire him out. What kept Sasuke on top was his precision and technique that he had spent hours perfecting. Naruto just telegraphed his movements too much, making it easy to exploit his weakness. Sasuke remembered a particular session, when Naruto had finally been able to get through his guard and deliver a clean hit to his jaw, knocking him back. The blonde had been so shocked and ecstatic that Sasuke was easily able to bounce back and answer Naruto's hit with 2 jabs to the stomach and a kick to the head. The boy fell on his back trying to regain the wind that had been knocked out of him. As he reeled on the ground, Sasuke absent-mindedly rubbed his jaw. That had actually really hurt. Before the blonde could get back up and retaliate, Haruka had intervened, naming Sasuke the victor. Naruto grumbled but stuck his hand out when Haruka asked him to make the seal of reconciliation. Sasuke returned the gesture and smirked at him. It hadn't been one of his arrogant smirks, but rather a smirk of acknowledgement. He had actually gotten a clean hit on him for the first time, and he had done without resorting to any tricks. He had done it purely with his own ability in taijutsu. The blonde had been surprised by the hidden message and offered one of his rare, grateful smiles in return. Sasuke was never able to find out how the blonde had managed to get that fast. His pride prevented him from simply asking the boy how he had done it. Even if he knew deep down that Naruto was better than he appeared, he would rather be caught in the midst of a sea of roaring fangirls than ask the dead last for help. The thought made him shiver. He supposed he could do worse than having the blonde as a teammate. At least he was passionate about a topic uncommon in the shinobi world. It would at least be better than being paired with the Haruno or the Yamanaka. He shuddered again as he turned his attention out of the window again. He watched the bird flying overhead as he began to think about his training regiment he would begin when class was finally over. Hyuga sat at his desk shifting through the mountain of paperwork that was the bane of all clan leaders in Konoha. As he worked on his proposal to another clan, he found his thoughts drifting back to the puzzle that had surrounded his eldest daughter. It had been 2 years since the incident within the Hyuga clan library, and his mind was still trying to process what exactly had happened. For centuries, the main family was tasked with advancing the research and decryption of the mysterious stone ring. After numerous attempts and years of research, only a handful of lines had ever been translated. Only 2 things were known for certain about the stone: that it required the Byakugan to read its contents and the history surrounding how the stone arrived under the clan. The monument had been a treasure safeguarded within the Hyuga compound long before they migrated to Konoha. During the times of feuding clans, it was a shrine where the current leader would come under the full moon and meditate in the center. It was said to contain the secret origins of the clan, the Byakugan, and the true duty of the clan. In the clan's early years, only the current clan leader was informed of the secrets within the tablet and how to reveal them. Now, no one knew its contents. Many cited this due to a particular fire that had erupted during a surprise attack on the clan's compound. The raid from a rival clan resulted in almost half of the clan's documents being destroyed. While some scrolls could be rewritten from memory, some information was forever lost. The leader of the clan had perished during the battle, and had failed to pass on the secrets of the shrine to his heir. After this incident, it was decided that any discoveries regarding the Hyuga ring were to be shared with the entire Elder Council in fear of losing such knowledge again. So much time and effort had been poured into recovering what they had lost, only to yield poor results. Others may have given up and simply left it as an unsolved relic to be forgotten to time, but they were the Hyuga clan. They were drenched in tradition and would never back down from a challenge just because it was difficult. Their pride and sense of duty would not let them. So to say that the elders had been uncharacteristically flabbergasted at Hinata's reaction with the monument would be an understatement. It wasn't well hidden that the council thought poorly of his older daughter and favored her prodigious younger sister. For her to finally elicit any sort activity from the relic that they themselves had failed at achieving was a massive blow to their pride. Even Hiyashi had felt a momentary stab of jealousy due to his own efforts, but it had been quickly overcome by a swell of pride. The incident had given him a much-needed advantage with dealing with the council. They had recently brought up the topic of who would be chosen as clan heiress and who would be sealed once again. Hiyashi had tried his best to postpone the decision for as long as he could. He had been buying as much time as he could so his daughters could enjoy what little time they had without the pressure of the seal looming overhead. Now, the council was torn apart. They still favored Hanabi, but this incident created an unprecedented problem. If Hinata were branded, she would be unable to return to the floor reserved only for main branch families, ruining their greatest breakthrough in the mystery of the ring. While they could alter the seal along the door and make an exception for her, they were uncomfortable with the idea for making exceptions for the side branch. So they settled to postpone the decision for an undecided amount of time, until they could come to a consensus. In the meantime, they wanted Hiyashi to make Hinata interact the ruin as much as possible. So friends. So far, you've seen a Hokage who's basically a full-time babysitter, an Anbu who charges extra for showing emotion, and a blonde kid who reads books mainly to turn them into bombs. But the party's just getting started. Because now we've got a shy girl who's stumbled upon a secret scroll that her entire clan has been uselessly obsessing over for generations. And let's give a special shout out to Big Brother Kitsune, whose life's purpose seems to be grabbing Naruto by the collar and swinging him around like a handbag. What's next? Who knows? Sometimes it feels like these Konoha folks only know how to give their kids PTSD in the name of a normal childhood. Shortly after the incident had occurred and Hinata had finally settled down, Hiraishin attempted to bring Hinata back down again and recreate the event. He almost chuckled as he remembered Hinata's reaction. She had been uncharacteristically adamant and refused to go back down to the bottom floor. Even after he delivered a direct order, she still wouldn't budge. If it weren't for the importance of the subject, Hiraishin might have been proud of her for standing up against him, even though it was out of fear. He eventually had to coerce her with the promise of something that had been very important to her late mother. The catch: it was on the same floor as the stone monument. Although her body was racked with fear, she held her head high as she followed behind father, lighting the way with a light fire jutsu in his palm. After all of the build-up, he had been sadly disappointed. The room remained as quiet and dark as it always had. With her Byakugan, Hinata informed him that the phrases that had been visible during the incident were still clear, and he made sure to copy the symbols and corresponding translation before he left. Hinata had almost let out a sigh of relief when nothing happened. She was anxious to leave the room that had plagued her dreams for weeks. It had taken all of her courage just to return the library at all. Before she could leave the room, her father turned his attention away from his scroll. Hinata, although nothing has happened today, I want you to keep attempting to recreate what transpired weeks ago. Hinata had naturally pale skin, but now it was turning so white that it almost glowed in the darkness of the room. Please, To-san, she pleaded, please don't make me come back her. Hinata, he said sternly, you are a kunoichi and more importantly, you are a Hyuga. You will not let fear control your actions. Am I understood? Am I understood? She ducked her head down, but slowly nodded her head showing she understood. Good. You will come down here at least once a week and try to react what happened before. You are to inform me immediately if anything happens. He turned to leave the room, but paused in the doorway. Without turning around he said, you will never overcome something you fear unless you confront it. The more you face it, the less it can control you. Never let fear control your life. After a pause of silence as Hinata stared surprised at her father's advice, he continued. Now, I do believe a promise is a promise. Come, let us find your mother's scroll. As he left back into the other room, Hinata followed swiftly behind him, smiling for the first time all day. As they shuffled out, Hiraishin reflected on the newly translated phrases Hinata had supplied. The will of the moon people. The duty to guard. These new verses caused an unfamiliar feeling to form in his chest. Although he was now entrenched in the games of politics, Hiraishin was still a shinobi at heart. His intuition had saved his life more times than he could count, and now it was warning him that something was coming. He did not like being in the dark about something, especially when it came to his clan. He could tell there was more to this mystery, but damned if he could see what it was. Drawn out of his thoughts, Hiraishin returned his attention from his trip down memory lane and returned to the letter he was writing. This was a problem better solved sooner rather than later, and he decided it was time to take some unprecedented action. While the elders would not agree with him, he could admit that neither he nor they were getting anywhere. It was time for some outside opinions. He signed his letter as he called for his messengers. Please see to it that this proposal is taken to Shikaku Nara immediately. Also, please find Hinata and tell her I would like to talk to her. Of course Hiraishin-sama, the servant said as he bowed. As he left the room, Hiraishin tried to move his thoughts away from the mess of the library and move on to something else. Today was an important day after all. Today was the day Hinata took her first step into the real world. He almost smirked, but there was a knock at his door as a light voice rang out, "You wished to see me, father." His face immediately shifted into his trademark stern composure as he told her to enter. She entered the room, keeping her back straight and eyes forward as she bowed before him. Hiraishin was paused before speaking. Today is an important day for you and I expect only your best. Anything short of that would dishonor the clan. Haitu-sama. He nodded. You are the heir to the most powerful clan in the village. Your actions represent not only your own strength, but also the strength of the clan. We cannot tolerate showing weakness. Do not disappoint us. Understood. Good, then you are dismissed. She nodded and bowed once again before scuffling out of the room. Once he was sure she was out of earshot, he let out a sigh. He had to keep up appearances after all, and it was too late to change his technique now. Hinata would have to flourish on her own or drown. He stared at one of the few pictures that adorned his desk. One was of himself and his wife along with his 2 daughters. It had been taken shortly after Hanabi was born. The other, that he held his focus, was of a trio of children standing in front of a man in a Junin jacket. The man with spiky white hair looked as though he was booming with laughter, seemingly amused at the antics of his students. Today was an important day that would shape the rest of her life. Her career was now out of his hands and about to be placed in someone else's. He sighed as visions of the past played in his mind before he returned to the surplus of work that threatened to engulf him. As unpopular as Hinata was within the clan, the opposite could be said for how the villagers regarded her. No matter what the elders said, the civilian population adored the kind Hyuga princess. Unlike many in her clan, she would always make sure to bow back to anyone who addressed her. She would always take time out of her day to talk with the small children running around the village. Today was no different. As she made her way to the academy, Hinata returned every smile and cheerily responded to the shopkeepers who wished her luck as she passed. Today was a big day. The big day. The day she finally became a kunoichi. It was uncommon for Hinata to be full of such confidence, but today she was sure of herself. Sure, she's still withdrawn and quiet, but a more astute observer would notice the spring in her step and the different way she carried herself. Due to her impeccable chakra control required of her to utilize the Jyuken techniques, the Academy's 3 techniques had been simple and required no time to learn. Of course, that didn't stop her from spending hours in private making sure that all of them were perfect. She walked around a pothole and shifted the weight on her back. She fumbled with the box in her bag, making sure that the orange wrapping paper wasn't visible. She'd die of embarrassment if someone saw the square bulge and asked whom it was for. Today wasn't just a special day for her. Today would be Naruto's last attempt at passing the academy. Although she was concerned, she had confidence that today would be the day he finally passed. She knew had been working extremely hard to keep up with the others. She always saw him sitting in the corner during the lunch with his nose in his books jotting down notes, and never wanted to disturb him. It always impressed her seeing him try so hard to improve himself. His determination was what helped her motivate herself to push through whenever she felt down. She was always impressed by his attempts to improve himself, and she never wanted to get in his way. But today was going to be the day it all finally paid off. Today he could finally get to show off what he could do. Flashback. One day, she had been roaming the training field searching for a particular herb that grew in the areas with high concentrations of chakra. As she finally found the small plant, she realized she was not alone. She had stumbled across the blonde deep in concentration with a strange kunai in his hands. He had multiple scrolls and books spread out around him in a circle. They contained all of the notes he had ever taken on his secret project, for today was a special day. Unknown to her, Hinata was about to witness one of the biggest milestones of Naruto's life. He had finally made a breakthrough with his secret project. He had been experimenting with creating his own seals when he stumbled across a strange connection. After spying on a Chunin and Junin sparring one day, Naruto had noticed how difficult it seemed for one of the Chunin to land their Raiden jutsus on their older, superior partner. Obviously his ability came from his experience, but this had made Naruto curious about what he would do if he were to come across an opponent who outclassed him that much. So he first set out to solve this conundrum with the original problem, ensuring that a jutsu would land. The problem with many techniques, such as Sasuke's fireball jutsu, was that it was relatively easy for the opponent to dodge. Which is the academy tried to drill into their students' heads to reserve their highly powerful jutsu for the end of a fight, after an opponent has been worn down or restrained. If you were facing a stronger opponent, this wasn't really a possibility. Any Junin worth their rank would dismantle a genin in a heartbeat if they were serious. Even if a genin were able to fire off a jutsu, more than likely the jonin would dodge unless they were severely distracted. Naruto first addressed this problem with his first example, landing a Raiden jutsu. So Naruto got to work creating a way to ensure that the electricity would connect with its target. It came to him in a flash of brilliance one rainy day as a stray bolt of lightning struck his apartment. Create a seal that functioned like a lightning rod. As he worked on this, he noticed several patterns for attracting the electricity seemed familiar. It took him a while to realize that the seals were familiar to the ones on his tri-pronged kunai. It seemed that the kanji served as a conduit that connected a source of chakra with the marking. It also seemed that the more chakra the object connected to, the more chakra necessary to pull off whatever the technique was. Spurred by this development, Naruto had a fierce internal debate about reaching out to it with his own chakra. Every book he had ever read about seals warned him about activating a seal without knowing what it would do. But, however smart Naruto had become regarding seals, he was still a reckless child that loved to test the limits. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. So, Naruto sat that day surrounded by his research with barrier seals ready to activate if anything went wrong. He let out a sigh as he got up and planted the kunai about 25 feet away. He wrapped a remote activation seal around the handle, before returning to the circle. He took a deep breath and ran through the hand signs. He closed his eyes and let his chakra reach out to the remote seal. Once it was linked, he began pushing his chakra into the seal in the handle. Once he linked with the seal, his mind was assaulted with a whole new form of sense. It was as if his mind was being fed two different displays of the world around him. Suddenly, he was aware of the seal's location as though it was a shining light in the dark. It stood out like a beacon of yellow light. Wow, was all Naruto could muster. As his chakra lingered in the seal, he could feel it molding itself to fit the seal's jutsu until it happened. Hinata could only let out a gasp as Naruto simply disappeared. All that was left of the blonde was a bright yellow flash. Just as quickly as he disappeared, the blonde reappeared and fell to the ground in a heap. He shook his head, as he tried to stand back up. He had never felt so disoriented in his life. What the heck was? He was cut off as he felt a searing pain, and his stomach suddenly decided that he needed a wake-up call. End flashback. Hinata had been shocked to say the least. She remembered how she couldn't help but stare at him for the rest of the week. It wasn't until he asked her if he had something on his face that she was able to turn away out of embarrassment. If he was able to learn something like that all on his own, she was sure that taking something as simple as the Academy's test would be a cakewalk. Her thoughts were interrupted as a shadow passed over her head and called out her name. Was that? Sasuke Uchiha took one last glance over his shoulder at the monument before turning and leaving the cemetery. He had a promise to keep and today was the first step towards making that promise a reality. As he walked through the Uchiha district, he almost shuddered out how empty it felt. It was nothing but a ghost town. A shell of its former glory. That would all change. He would make sure of that. Entering the village, the civilians all stopped to bow towards the last Uchiha. The prodigal boy destined to return the clan to its former glory. He almost wanted to scoff at them. All that they had to give was pity, and he wanted none of it. While it did sometimes stoke his ego to hear others compliment his talents, it was never personal. It didn't come from a place of true appreciation. Besides, the feeling would always be shot down by the knowledge of how that man had been 4 steps ahead of him by that stage. But today was special, and he wasn't going to let that man bring him down. Today was his first step towards his ultimate goal. No longer would he have to waste his time the boring lectures of the academy. No longer would he have to put up with those useless fangirls every day unless he was cursed by Kami herself and teamed up with one. Today was his first step towards his goal. Today was the day he became a ninja. His thoughts were echoed by the world's most unpredictable ninja as he stared over the village deep in thought. Today is finally the day. I am going to become a ninja. All of his hard work outside of the classroom was finally going to be put to the test and he was going to show them all what he could really do. Naruto. Speaking of which, he turned his head down below and stuck out his tongue at the assortment of Chunin and Anbu gathering below him. He noticed a few streaks darting towards him from above and decided it was time to go. Cutting the rope dangling him in the air, the boy started to free fall down towards the ground and the group below him. Twisting midair, he kicked off the stone wall and fell at angle toward a roof. As he got closer to the roof at speeds less than comfortable for his observers, his hands whipped together in a hand sign and yelled, "Release." Below him, multiple seals along the cliff side and ground activated, shooting columns of pressurized air into the sky. It wasn't enough to stop him, but it was certainly enough for him to control his descent and bounce of the rock wall onto a building. As soon as his feet touched the ground, he shot off like a bat out of hell, closely followed by an assortment of Chunin, Junin, and Anbu. "Come on, guys," he shouted over his shoulder. "I haven't even done anything this time." Smirking, he crossed his hands in another hand sign, as multiple seals sprung to life. A cloud of smoke enveloped the cliffside, and as it cleared, the people of Konoha could only stare in abject horror, as the Hokage monument was desecrated in paint. "Now, I've done something. You won't be getting away with this, Uzumaki," one Chunin shouted at him. The blonde boy smirked as he led through his carefully planned course through side alleys, rooftops, and buildings all across Konoha. He led the pack through his planned route, triggering traps and seals left and right, covering his pursuers in an assortment of undesirable materials, from glue and feathers to paint and cement. Laughing the entire time, Konoha's #1 troublemaker woke the town by storm and loved every minute of it. At one point, he jumped from one rooftop into the middle of the street, and couldn't help but chuckle as flew over someone he knew. "Hi Hinata-chan," he yelled with a smile before taking off with a cloud of smoke behind him. The girl could only stare in astonishment as the group of shinobi chasing the blonde ran around her. After a while, he decided it was finally time to call it quits and finally head to the academy. As the Chunin still left in the pursuit saw the boy make a sharp left turn, they began to smirk. Many knew it was a dead end, and they would finally be able to end this drawn-out pursuit. They finally turned the corner only to be met with nothing. The boy was simply gone. The censors in the group reached out but were unable to find him. It was as if he had simply vanished. Halfway across the village on a rooftop overlooking a certain ramen stand, a single tri-pronged kunai was embedded in the ground. The next second, there was a flash of yellow and a young boy appeared as if from nowhere grinning victoriously. A short second later he hunched over and began violently regurgitating the contents of his stomach. Damn, every time, he thought to himself. At least it was becoming more manageable. He wiped the blood from his mouth on his sleeve and leaned against the railing for support. He reached down and pocketed the kunai before turning to admire his handiwork. The Hokage monument was decorated in a rainbow of colors and drawings, all planned out by his seals. Of course he had added a few tricks as well, courtesy of his Fuinjutsu talents. The second Hokage's eyes seemed to be crying as water poured continuously from the statue's eyes. A similar situation could be found on the head of the Sandaime as smoke seemed to be coming out of his ears. Even the Yondaime could not seem to escape the boy's wrath. The man's face was decorated with glitter, creating a bright shine off of the morning sun. Naruto giggled to himself as he panted and regained his strength. Oh, it had been worth it. His final prank before he became a ninja, and he had pulled out all the stops to make it one to remember. As he settled down, he finally noticed the other presence on the roof and gulped before trying to bolt off. He was caught and held by the hem of his shirt as he flailed trying to free himself from his captor. Going somewhere? A voice that still sent shivers up his skin asked. Nowhere Kitsune-san. What are you doing here? I knew there were about 5 places that you probably show up at after that hot mess. Knowing you, I decided to follow your gut and stake out here. By the way, that technique still needs work. I know, the boy said, resigned to his fate and finally stopping his struggling. So, where do you think we are going now? To go have a pleasant talk with Gigi? The boy asked hopefully. The masked teenager shook his head and replied, no, we are off for a nice, long chat with Iruka-san. Wouldn't want to be late for today, now would we? I'm sure he'll be very understanding. Naruto gulped as the world of pain he knew he was in for slowly approached him. Hinata couldn't help but giggle as she watched Iruka go off and lecture Naruto about his terrible behavior. The two looked so much like brothers that at times it was hard to believe they weren't actually related. Naruto at least looked a little ashamed as Iruka went off on him. After a while, he was finally able to make him stop by saying he could remove all he had done right now. The Chunin was obviously confused, but allowed him to go on. Naruto clasped his hands together, working his way through several hand signs before whispering release and pointing out of the window. Iruka and Hinata could only look in awe as the Hokage monument looked as clear as it had the previous day. "What did you do?" he asked. "I just used the reverse seals I placed up there. I knew you were probably going to make me clean it up, so I decided to save some time." He grinned and rubbed the back of his head as Iruka simply sighed. While he was still upset about the whole debacle, he was also quite proud of the level of skill and forethought Naruto needed to pull it off. He decided to let him off easy, with a promised visit with the Hokage after everything was over. As everyone settled into their seats, Iruka stood in front of the class and began his speech. "Before we start with the examinations, I just wanted to say how proud I am of all of you. You all have worked so hard to reach this point, and I have been honored to be your teacher. Remember all of the lessons you have learned here and let them guide you to success out there in the real world." And with that he began calling up the first students. The graduation exam for the academy was split up into 5 parts: a written exam, an accuracy test, a taijutsu spar, the academy 3, and a special section to demonstrate any personal abilities that could warrant extra credit. Many of the students from civilian families opted out from this particular section. They mostly felt that any skills that they could demonstrate would be unimpressive when compared to the abilities passed down through clan families. For example, Kiba and Akamaru showed off their Suga, Hinata demonstrated katas of the Jiyuken, and Sasuke let loose his clan's signature Gukaku no Jutsu. After the chatter over Sasuke's technique died down, Naruto was finally called up and he could barely contain his excitement. He ran to the center of the courtyard with his bag of sealing materials slung over his shoulder. Iruka and the 2 teachers grading with him felt a sense of dread wash over them as the class prankster approached to demonstrate his individual talent. "All right Naruto, what do you have planned for us today, and please be serious. You know this can go a long way to affect your grade. Don't you worry Iruka-sensei. I wouldn't mess this up for sake of a joke. This time, I am going to graduate. I'm ready to show you what I can really do." Iruka gave the confident smile. "All right, and what do you have prepared?" Naruto knelt and began pulling out scrolls and bottles of ink out of his bag. "I'm going to demonstrate some special seals that I made all by myself. My presentation is going to have multiple parts, but I've got the really complicated one already made. I just wanted to show you that I can do the first part by myself before moving on." Iruka was confused, but he still nodded. "All right then, you may begin." Naruto gave him one last smile, before his face changed to one of deep concentration. He dipped his brush into the special ink and began his careful strokes along the scroll. "What the hell does that idiot think he's doing?" Kiba whispered to Shino, as they watched the blonde scribble away on some scroll. "I believe he is attempting to utilize his proficiency in Fuinjutsu for this segment of the test," Shino replied in his monotone voice. "What proficiency? I love Naruto as much as the next guy, but the guy's not too bright. I know he sometimes uses seals for his pranks, but come on. Does he really think he's good enough for it to help him with the test? Considering he is halfway through the intermediate series, one would assume that he knows what he is doing. How the hell do you know that?" Shino raised a hand as one of his Kikaichu insects crawled up his finger. "I send my helpers to observe everyone in the academy. I did it to learn as much as I could about my potential teammates and keeps tabs on them in the event something went awry during the day." Kiba looked shocked for a moment, before grumbling, "I swear, if I see anything that even resembles a tick in Akamaru's fur, I'm gonna." "Done Iruka-sensei," Naruto yelled as he wiped his brow, before handing the fruit of his labor over to Iruka. Iruka looked over the scroll pretending to inspect it, when he was really trying to save face in front of the other judges. To be honest, Fuinjutsu had been a subject that always went over his head. Of course he had the required knowledge needed for someone of Chunin rank, but he had never really looked too into it. "All right Naruto. It looks very impressive, but what does it do exactly?" Naruto's face lit up with his signature grin as he took back the scroll. "I'm happy to show ya, but I'm gonna need you or one of the other teachers to help me with a demonstration." He looked behind Iruka over at the other 2 teachers and asked, "Do any of you know any Raiden Jutsu?" Mizuki shook his head, curious of what the boy could be planning, but his colleague nodded and handed him his clipboard. As he stepped forward, Naruto instructed him to stand in place as he ran to other side of the training field. All right, sensei. Fire it at me with all you got. Ruruka was instantly worried. Naruto, are you sure about this? Naruto flashed him a smile. Don't you worry, sensei. I got this. He turned his gaze back to the other teacher. Ready whenever you are. The Chunin had a hard time suppressing a grin as he began forming hand signs. It wasn't every day the demon child actually asked you to attack it. He mentally smirked as he prepared his one Raiden jutsu that he had copied from a cloud ninja he had fought last spring. It had definitely been worth all that practice to get to use it now. He didn't know what the demon brat had planned, but this wasn't an B-class jutsu for nothing. It wouldn't kill the brat, but it was certainly going to hurt. Excruciating even. He formed his final tiger seal, before throwing his palms out to his side. The lightning chakra began swirling around his palms and he clapped his palms forward, while screaming, Raiden, Thunder Stream. The thunderbolt raced across the training field almost too fast for Ruruka to see. While his eyes could follow its path, his body was too slow to respond. He started to scream out towards the blonde, who had his confident smirk plastered on his face the entire time. As the bolt was about to reach him, Naruto whipped open his seal and the bolt slammed into the paper and ink. At first nothing happened, but then the markings on the seal glowed white as the bolt of lightning disappeared in a flash of light. After it died down, the center of the scroll now held the kanji for lightning. Everyone in the courtyard stared at the steaming scroll and tried to comprehend what had just happened. Naruto turned the scroll around, inspected it, and smiled, as he looked it over. Thanks, sensei. That was perfect. The Chunin was dumbfounded. That had been the strongest jutsu he had in his arsenal, and the boy had seemingly brushed it off. Naruto, Ruruka said as a quiet voice, what did you just do? Naruto ran over and pushed the scroll into his hands. See this, he said pointing to the kanji for lightning, this is the jutsu that Reishi-sensei shot at me. I sealed it into this scroll. Naruto kept talking a mile a minute as he started heading towards one of the training dummies on the other side of the field. There are different sealing techniques that can seal elemental jutsu. You just have to be ready for which type you want to seal. I've always found it easiest to absorb Raiden jutsu cause it's already in a natural state of energy. As he arrived at the wooden dummy, he began rummaging through his bag. Since I don't know any Raiden jutsu myself, I thought I'd show off with a storage seal before moving on to the main event. Which is, AHA. This. He pulled out a piece of paper with a triangular seal marking and slapped it onto the dummy's chest. Racing back to Ruruka, he took the scroll out of the Chunin's hands. I have always been bothered by how hard it can be to land some jutsu on faster opponents, so I made this to fix the problem. He faced away from the training dummy and swung the seal forward as he yelled, release. The blue lightning jutsu erupted from the seal, and raced across the courtyard away from him. Just as quickly as it left the seal, it arced upward over Naruto's head and raced back toward the dummy. It slammed into the wooden caricature, which erupted in an explosion of splinter leaving a smoking crater in its place. Turning away from his stunned classmates, he puffed out his chest and stared at Ruruka. I present to you, the Lighting Rod Seal. Designed to attract any and all Hiraishin jutsu directly to its location. Place it on an enemy shinobi, and any projectile-style Raiden jutsu you use is sure to land. Ruruka's face lit up in a big smile and he ruffled the boy's hair. Very good, Naruto. I'm very impressed. You did stupendously. The boy let put a nervous laugh as he scratched the back of his head. He turned and bowed to Reishi-sensei, thanking him for his help. As he headed back to his classmates, Ruruka made eye contact with Reishi and shot him a fierce glare. That had been a high-class jutsu. If it had hit Naruto dead on, he would have likely been sent to the ICU for third-degree burns. He shuddered to think what would have happened if his seal hadn't worked as planned. His look sent his message loud and clear. The Hokage would absolutely be hearing on this. The man scowled before heading back to Mizuku to retrieve his clipboard. Ruruka wasn't the only person upset about Naruto's performance. Mizuku internally frowned as he reflected Naruto's performance in his tests. He had actually passed his written exam with decent scores, and had even scored highly on his taijutsu and accuracy tests. Even if he failed one of the Academy 3, which he likely would in the Bunshin section, his bonus points from this event would surely propel him just enough to pass. Mizuki had plans for the boy. Plans that had assumed that the boy would be desperate enough to use his close connection to the Hokage to swipe the Forbidden Scroll. He would have to take measures into his own hands and ensure that the blonde failed. It would be a shame if the boy's written exam was somehow misplaced in the grading process. Who would believe that the dead last had received a 84% on his written exam anyways? Naruto sat dejected on the lone swing of the Academy's courtyard as he watched the newly minted genin chatting amongst themselves, ecstatic with their results. It took everything he had to keep in the tears that threatened to fall from his face. Hinata watched on heartbroken, as the hitai around her neck felt as if weighed a ton. She felt cemented in place as the sinking weight of her headband and the package in her bag reminded her of her crush's failure. She had been in this situation before. Yearning to comfort the blonde as he dejectedly watched the other children laughing amongst themselves. She resolved herself and pushed her shaking leg forward. This was her last chance to help her crush in the time that he needed a friend most. Before she could go anywhere, the blonde took off. The students' parents had started to arrive and he couldn't stand to see their smiling faces and looks of pride. It was just an all too painful reminder of what he didn't have. Hinata prepared to jump after him, but her personal guide caught her shoulder. "You did well, Hinata-sama. I'm sure Hiyashi-sama will be most pleased with your results. You should be proud of yourself." As she watched the retreating form of the orange-clad blonde, she felt anything but proud of herself. She had been too afraid and failed again. Possibly for the last time. She hung her head as she followed Ko back towards the Hyuga compound. On top of the walls of the academy, Mizuki smiled as he watched the retreating form of the blonde boy. It was going to be too easy. Several hours later, night had settled over Konoha, but the town was anything but sleepy. In the woods outside of the village, a boy clad in orange raced away as fast as he could while carrying a rather large scroll on his back. His cheek stung from the cut of a blade that had been way too close for comfort. His mind was still upset, when he remembered how he had acquired it. Flashback. Sneaking into the Hokage's office had been easy. Getting into Jiji's secret room had been slightly more difficult as he struggled to remember the codes from when Jiji would open the safe in front of him. He had almost been home free until he opened the door, coming face to face with the surprised Hokage flanked by his right-hand man. "Naruto. What are?" He was cut off as a cloud of smoke erupted, revealing a scantily clad girl wiggling her hips seductively. The old man stared for a moment, before blood spurted from his nose, rocketing him into the ground. His bodyguard had barely glanced at the naked figure before drawing his tanto and slashing at the figure's head. His hench quickly disappeared as he used every ounce of his speed to evade the cut, and even so, he was still grazed along his cheek. He had quickly slapped a piece of paper onto the Anbu's outstretched arm before disappearing in a flash of yellow light. The Anbu cursed as his arm dragged him to the ground, causing cracks to appear on the floor. "Gravity seal," he cursed as he tried to peel the paper from his arm to no avail. His left hand went through one-handed seals before erupting in bright, white fire. He clasped his hand on the paper and began painfully peeling it from his skin. Ripping up flesh as he went, he cursed at Naruto's stupidity. He didn't know what the blonde was up to or what he was involved with, but he was in for a world of trouble after he found him. Finally removing the seal from his body, he cauterized his wound before turning towards the passed-out Hokage. It would reflect poorly on the esteemed leader if others were to find him in his current state, let alone what caused it. Kitsune sighed as he ran through hand seals to wake the professor. Up. His eyes darted to the window as he spied a dark form hurrying across rooftops on the other side of the village. His eyes promised a world of pain for whoever was responsible for this mess. End flashback. Naruto wiped his mouth and ignored the feeling of a hole in his stomach as he raced along the treetops. After finding a spot that was a relatively safe distance away from the village, he finally took a moment to catch his breath. He had never moved that fast in his life, and he had never expected Kitsune to actually take a swing at him. The older boy had barely given his Oryoke Jutsu a second glance. Seriously, Kitsune was all work and no play. Not one to waste time, Naruto set the scroll down and began poring over its contents. His eyes flashed over advanced Kaiten jutsus capable of leveling entire armies and sweetened jutsu capable of making blood boil, but he ignored those looking for something that was at least a little manageable for him. Not that he wouldn't love to learn such awesome jutsu like that, but he was on a limited timetable and he didn't want to waste a second on something he couldn't learn immediately. As he scrolled over the contents, his eyes fell across the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Perfect. He was about to begin work on it, but his eyes continued wandering the page until it stopped on the next entry. It was a seal that practically screamed at him. It looked so familiar that Naruto felt his face pale when he finally recognized what it was. While the shape of the formula and key parts were different, it was the jutsu formula for the project he had been working on in private for 3 years. He bit his lip as he looked between the 2 gold mines that he had discovered. Here was a treasure trove of information that could potentially finally help him master his secret technique without all of the negative side effects, but Naruto wasn't stupid. It had taken him 3 years to get where he was with the technique, and Mizuki-sensei said he had to master one by the end of the night. Making up his mind, he pulled out a scroll and ink as he began making a copy seal to record all of the information regarding his project. As he was about to place it on top of the scroll, he faltered. He quickly unfurled the entire scroll and skimmed his eyes across the bottom of the page, and a wave of relief swam over him as he did. Always check for an anti-theft seal. If he had placed the copy seal, all of the contents of the forbidden scroll would have been wiped clean, and he knew Gigi would have been furious if that happened. Slightly altering the contents of his copy seal, he held it over the section regarding the teleportation technique and poured chakra into his scroll. With a flash of light, a copy image was now safely within his own scroll. Photo seal complete. Ensuring that it was safely secure in his bag, he returned his attention back to the Kage Bunshin and got to work. I want every available off-duty Junin out there searching for Naruto. We cannot allow that scroll to be lost or stolen. Am I understood? Yes, sir. An echoed cry responded to the Hokage. The old man was deeply concerned as he could only wait for one of his subordinates to return with some news. As soon as the cage had regained consciousness, Kitsune had sped off in pursuit of the orange-clad boy. His aura promised a world of pain. Of course, Hiraishin was worried about the boy's well-being, but the leader side of him was more concerned about the contents of the scroll. It would be a disaster if a scroll listing many of the Nadime's forbidden jutsu were to fall into enemy hands. Especially when the scroll contained 2 jutsu that the professor considered as the most deadly in all of Konoha's records. The Hiraishin and Edo Tensei were 2 of the deadliest jutsu ever created, and the details of how to perform them now were in the hands of an impulsive young boy being led into some kind of trap. Hours later, it had taken him some time, but he had finally caught onto the boy's scent. About 5 minutes ago, he had been following a barely noticeable track, until the boy's chakra signature lit up like a flare in the sky. When he finally arrived in the clearing, he came across the young boy in the deep embrace of Iruka Yumino, sobbing with happiness into his flak jacket. He noted the lack of a Hittite on the older boy's forehead and put 2 and 2 together. He glanced over at the twitching form of the other academy instructor, Mizuki. The man was beaten to a pulp and required medical attention, but he would certainly live. Kitsune sniffed at the air. It was heavy with the distinctive smell that a Kage Bunshin's cloud created. Piecing the picture together, Kitsune dropped to the floor and hung the forbidden scroll across his back. After the target was secure, he began making his way towards the duo. Naruto smiled and ran up to him, only to be met with a forceful open palm to the throat. Ignoring the boy's sputtering and spasms of pain, he knelt before the Chunin still leaning against the tree. You are injured, Iruka-san. Do you require immediate medical attention? The man shook his head as he leaned forward, showing his injury. Windmill shuriken to my back, but it managed to miss my spine. The flak jacket absorbed most of the damage. Kitsune nodded and began helping the man to his feet. He then turned his attention back to the boy who had finally regained his ability to speak. The blond boy was about to speak up, when he was met with an icy glare and a more than uncomfortable amount of killing intent. And just what did you think you were doing? But Mizuki Tem said, I realize what happened. I can piece the picture together. What I can't understand is how you could be so stupid as to not realize that something was wrong. Did you not think that it was somewhat suspicious to steal one of the most heavily guarded scrolls in all of Konoha? Or did you not think something was wrong when I decided to attack you? The blond boy took a step back under the heavy scrutiny. I get that you're mad, but I'm not mad, the older boy cut him off, I'm disappointed. This shut the boy up as he held his head down in shame. I'm sorry, he whispered. Don't be sorry. Be smarter. A few seconds went by, before the blonde felt the familiar touch of the older boy's hand on his head. He looked up and met the older boy's eyes. He noticed that their coldness had faded away. I expect more from a fellow shinobi of the leaf, he said as he tapped the forehead protector on top of Naruto's head. The boy was shocked as more tears threatened to fall from his face. He held his head high and vigorously nodded. Good. Now that this mess is cleared up, let us return to the Hokage. He took the scroll off his back and handed it to the young boy. Are you sure I can trust you with this? The blonde beamed and secured the scroll to his back as the Anbu agent picked up the beaten form of Mizuki. Then let's be on our way. Days later, the Sandaime sat in his office puffing away at this pipe, glad that the previous day's events had finally blown over. The suspect had been apprehended, the scroll had been returned, and the boy had even learned a highly advanced jutsu for his trouble. Of course he had received a rather scathing lecture once he had returned, but, in the end, he had let Iruka's decision stand. If it hadn't been for Mizuki's meddling, he was sure Naruto would have passed the graduation problem without a problem. This, however, created two problems. The boy finally knew his dark secret, or one of them at least. He had been worried about the boy's reaction to hearing such world-crushing news, but the boy had bounced back as determined as ever. It wasn't every day that you found out why the entire civilian population of the village decided to hate you. His reaction had been a testament of the boy's resolve and of his bond with his teacher. He made sure to remember to give Iruka a slight bump in his paycheck in the upcoming weeks. The other issue regarded the selection of teams for the new batch of genin. With Naruto now added to the mix, he would have to rearrange the team selections. He had originally considered the possibility of throwing Sasuke, Naruto, and Sakura together to form the standard dead last with Rookie and Kunoichi of the Year combination, but eventually tossed that idea out the window. While he was very impressed with Sakura's intelligence, he found her actual skill level lacking for one labeled as the Academy's top Kunoichi. After much debate, he decided to shift her over to Team 8 with Kurenai Yuhi. The woman would serve as a fine role model for the young girl. She would be sure to knock any whimsical ideas out of the little girl's head and mold her into a fine soldier. With Kurenai as her teacher and her impeccable chakra control, he was sure that she had the potential to turn into a truly talented genjutsu specialist. As he looked over the new roster one last time, he could not help but smile as the latest iteration of Team 7 reminded him of the previous incarnation that had served under Jiraiya. Those piercing black and white eyes paired with that signature blonde hair brought back both wonderful and painful memories of the trio, each of whom left a permanent mark on the history of the village. He signed off on his last decision of the night before finally deciding to head to bed. The stack of paperwork for tomorrow would surely be there when he returned. Across the village, Naruto lay on his bed staring up at the headband in his hands. He had done it. He was finally a shinobi. Yet he still felt like he hadn't deserved it, no matter what Iruka reassured him. He didn't care what Mizuki did. Sure, he may have altered his scores, but he had still fallen for his ploy like a desperate child. Yet the Sandaime had still approved Iruka's decision and let him be a shinobi, even after falling for such an obvious and stupid trap. He was going to make it up to the old man for all of the trouble, and not just by being the best damn shinobi he could. Maybe he could do something to lighten up his work schedule. Just another thing to add to the back burner. Speaking of his projects, he double-checked to ensure that his security seals were in place before he ducked his head under his bed. He rummaged inside his bag and pulled out the scroll he had been careful to hide from the Hokage. Gigi already knew he could perform the other technique, so he wouldn't mind if he made a copy of the other one right. Even though guilt racked through his body, Naruto opened up the scroll to the jutsu that he finally had a name to, the Hiraishin no Jutsu. Whoever named the thing certainly had an air for the theatric. Flying Thunder God Jutsu indeed. All in all, he was extremely lucky that the jutsu did not require hand signs, or else he may have never figured it out. It would have been impossible to solve problem with only half the information. The more he had looked between the seal from the scroll and the seal on the kunai, the more he could tell that they had been developed by two different people. The bulk of the schematics were the same, but there were several minor improvements in the version from the kunai. Theatrical or not, whoever redesigned the seal was a genius. The overall shape of the seal had been completely overhauled and shaped to fit inside the kanji of endurance, love, and sword. Why it was designed that way, he hadn't the faintest idea, but he was ready to find out. He was getting ready to jot down some new notes when there was a rapid knock on his door. Who could it possibly have been at this hour? It was nearly 10:30. He opened the door to find nothing but air staring back at him. He glanced up and down the street, but found no one around. Despite the apparent bareness, he could still feel a lingering gaze bearing straight at him. He looked down and was surprised to find a nicely wrapped orange box with a blue ribbon sitting on his doorstep. He picked up the note on top and opened it. It was a nice little note written with elegant handwriting. It was short and to the point, but carried weight behind its few words. Congratulations on graduating. I'm so happy you were able to pass. Good luck, and I'm sure you will become a splendid shinobi. He felt his breath hitch as he picked up the box. Over the years, he had received mysterious gifts around his birthday from some unknown person. One year he had received his beloved frog wallet, and the next he had received his beloved goggles. He had always assumed it was Gigi, but the boy had spent enough time in his office to know that this wasn't his handwriting. He gave one last look from his doorway, noticing a small shadow hiding behind a air conditioning unit 2 buildings away. Whoever you are, thank you so much. For everything, he shouted. He noticed the shadow fall deeper into the darkness of the roof, before a neighbor across the street opened his window and started shouting. Shut up, you damn brat. Some of us are trying to sleep. The boy's face crunched up in a similar frown. Shut up, Tsubiki-tem. I'll do what I want. With that, he headed inside and slammed the door behind him. The shadow could not help but giggle by the boy's antics as it started making its way back home. In the words of one of its classmates, it would be quite troublesome if it was discovered that they were absent this late at night. Naruto woke up as a nasty jolt of chakra burst through his system. He groaned and wanted to return to the sweet embrace of sleep, but he knew that he'd just receive a nastier jolt in another 5 minutes. Deciding it was time to get up, he lifted up his shirt and peeled the seal off of his chest. Another useful trick he had learned from his books. Shinobi had long ago realized it was much more cost-effective to design a new seal than keep wasting money on alarm clocks. Their instincts were so jumpy that they kept driving kunai into their alarm clocks as they went off. He pulled himself out of bed and groggily meandered over to kitchen. He reached into his cabinet and started heating up a pot of water, before heading off towards the bathroom. As he let the shower warm up, he stared at his shirtless form in the mirror. After a minute of silence, he began focusing chakra and stared at the dark insignia that appeared over his stomach. So this was it. This was the source of every bad thing that had ever happened in his life. The source of all his pain, all his anguish, all his loneliness. Even as these bitter thoughts raced through his mind, his analytical side couldn't help but be amazed by the Yondaime's work. The fourth really had been a genius. This wasn't just an efficient seal, this was art. Naruto could only recognize the double elephant seal, but he had no idea what the others meant. This was the step beyond the advanced class. A point that he only dreamed of reaching. He had initially held some resentment for the Yondaime's actions, but he found that he couldn't stay mad at his idol. The man had to make the difficult decision and had apparently made the ultimate sacrifice in the process. If the fourth really thought he was up to the task, he was going to be sure to prove it to him. Besides, if those close to him saw him for who he truly was, what else really mattered? Newly invigorated, he tentatively entered the hot shower as a new train of thought re-entered his mind. It had been nagging at him all night. Who could have possibly delivered that thoughtful gift? He had already ruled out Nei-chan. It wasn't her style. She preferred to be loud, upfront, and commanded your attention. Certainly wasn't Kitsune. While quiet, he would be frank and deliver anything in person, not hiding away in the dark. Besides, he had told him he would not give him another gift until he had mastered the previous gift from his last birthday. No one else came to mind as he dried himself off and headed towards his closet. He opened it and a sea of white and orange stared back at him. He had tried to shake things up with this awesome orange jumpsuit he had found a few months ago, but Kitsune had given it one look before slicing it in half, warning him to never wear it again. So he had stuck with his orange hoodies, until today that is. He reached into the back of the closet and pulled out the gift he had received from the previous night. As he stared at himself in the mirror, he felt something was missing. He snapped his fingers and raced over to his nightstand. He pulled his signature goggles over his neck and tightened his Hiraishin around his forehead, before returning to the mirror. There we go. So friends. Hinata saw something strange written in the library, and her father forced her to go back there, using her mother's memory as emotional leverage. Naruto painted the Hokage monument in rainbow colors, impressed everyone with his sealing jutsu at the exam, but Mizuki sabotaged his papers and tricked him into stealing the forbidden scroll. Iruka saved him in the forest, and Naruto finally got his headband. Now, a secret admirer left him a gift at his doorstep. Suspense is building. Now, let's move ahead. Today is team assignment day. Will Naruto and Sasuke end up on the same team? Will Hinata ever reveal it was her who gave the gift? And what's the deal with that mysterious writing in the Hyuga library? The drama is about to unfold, folks. He beamed as he admired his new look. Whoever had picked it out for him certainly had style. His eyes gazed over the clock and he was pleased to note he still had plenty of time. He strolled back into the kitchen, poured the hot water into his cup of ramen, and began his stroll out towards the academy. By this time, Hinata had already woken up and was getting dressed as well. She had just finished combing her hair, and was leaving her bathroom. As she opened the door, her gaze hardened as she stared holes through the tiny scroll sitting on her desk. The day after the incident in the library, she had woken up with the small scroll clenched firmly in her hands. She had no recollection of how she had acquired it, and when she asked her father about it, he claimed to have no knowledge of any scroll. The first time she opened it, she had felt the same feeling that the horned figure had given off in the room. Of course, she immediately wanted to be rid of it. However, no matter how many times she tried, the thing kept coming back in perfect condition. She had originally thrown it out of her window, only to find it later that night on her desk. Not one to give up, she had buried, burned, and ripped it apart, but it always kept reappearing fully intact later that day. It disturbed her to no end. It was like some cursed object she couldn't rid herself of. When she tried to show her father, his eyes seemed to fog up and he would act as if he had no idea what she was talking about. It was supernatural and she did not like it. What truly irritated her was whatever the scroll was trying to tell her, it was doing a poor job of it. No matter what she did, the scroll remained blank. She had tried to read it when she was alone, with the Byakugan, and even back in that accursed room. Every time, it remained as blank as the day she opened it. She shot it one last glare before picking up her kunai pouch and left the room. As she walked out, she bumped into the Hyuga's clan's little ball of fire. Good morning, Nei-chan. While Hanabi was as serious as her father during spars, the moment she stepped out of the dojo, she was a bustling little firecracker of energy. Sue, she drawled, leaning in towards her sister, did you deliver your gift last night? Hinata's face flushed crimson as she nervously began tapping her fingers. I don't know what you're talking about. Hanabi held her cocky smile, as she placed her hands on her hips. You can't lie to me, Nei-chan. You may have told Ko you were just out training, but I saw what direction you were heading. Right towards Na. Hinata slapped her hand over Hanabi's mouth as her head whipped back and forth to make sure they were alone. Please don't talk about that here, she pleaded. The young girl rolled her eyes. Literally everyone knew about Hinata's crush. She didn't understand why the need to keep it so hush-hush. Apparently the only ones still oblivious to the fact were her father and the blonde boy in question. Got it, Nei-chan, she said after Hinata removed her hand. Well, I just wanted to wish you good luck with your team assignments. She held her hand to her forehead in a mocking gesture. Who knows, maybe you will be paired off with that dashing Naruto-kun. It will be like a dream come true. Hinata shot her sister her patented side eye, clearly not amused by her joke. She still gave her a short hug before she made her way out of the house. Hanabi sighed as she watched her sister go. Her handler always tried to persuade her that she was the stronger of the two sisters, but she wouldn't hear any of it. She admired her sister's fierce determination, and, no matter what father said, Hinata was a stronger kunoichi than she would ever be. While she had been teasing, she really did hope that Hinata was placed on the same team as her crush. It would do her some good by forcing her into his presence, for everyone knew she would never make the first move herself. Shaking her head, she headed off towards the kitchen, hoping to sneak off with a cinnamon roll before she had her morning katas. Sasuke paused as he entered the mostly empty classroom to see the blonde boy dozing off in the front row. He just didn't know when to quit. Even after failing for the third time, he still had the gall to show up at the graduation ceremony. He passed him without a word as he claimed his seat in the second row next to the window. Over time, more and more of his classmates trickled in, each shooting the blonde the same confused look. Finally, Shikamaru arrived and paused in front of the blonde. He tapped his knuckles on top of the boy's head, waking him up. "Naruto, don't you think this is getting a little sad? This is for graduates only, not dropouts." Sure, it was harsh, but it was time for the blonde to start facing reality. The boy yawned before erupting in a smile and tapping at his own hite. "I know it's for graduates. That's why I'm here." "Well, what do you know? You actually did it." The pineapple-haired boy fought a smile from forming on his face. "You know it," the blonde beamed. Shikamaru shook his head, noticing the blonde's new clothes, before muttering, "Troublesome," and walking up the stairs to take his seat next to Choji. Hinata had blushed when she had seen the boy already dressed in the clothes she had left for him. She was happy to know that the blonde liked her gift. She had given him a gray long-sleeve shirt and navy short-sleeve hoodie along with 2 pairs of pants. One dark orange and one gray. She thought he looked quite handsome, and tried to stop a blush from creeping up her face. After several minutes, Iruka finally walked into the room and took his place in front of the class. "I want you all to know just how proud I am of all of you. Your hard work has finally paid off and now you are all official shinobi of Leaf. Now remember, the teams that each of you will be split up into will be like your family. More than likely, you will be working with these people for the rest of your life. However, the life of a ninja is never a certain one. Make sure to treasure every moment with your teammates, since you never know when they might be gone." He paused, as he made sure everyone let the message sink in. "Sorry to end on that sour note, you guys, but now let's move on to what you're all waiting for. Your team assignments." Everyone sat up as Iruka began rattling off the names. An eerie quietness settled over the room, only broken by the whispers of the groups whose names had been called. That was until Team 7, Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto lifted his head at the sound of his name. Hinata Hyuga. A sharp intake of breath was heard from the back of the class, and Sasuke Uchiha. In a flash, all of the girls in the room let out a loud groan as none of them were placed with their precious Sasuke-kun. They all shot glares at Hinata, who eeped and tried to bury herself in her jacket. Now Team 8. Sakura Haruno. She came out of her funk and paid him her direct attention. Kiba Inuzuka. The boy chuckled as the pink-haired girl let out a sigh, and Shino Aburame. The said boy merely adjusted his glasses. The pink-haired girl looked dejected and uncomfortable with her new teammates. "Take that forehead, girl," Ino thought triumphantly, before a wave of realization rolled over her. "Wait, but that means..." Iruka cleared his throat before he continued. "Team 10 will be as follows: Ino Yamanaka, Shikamaru Nara, and Choji Akamichi." It was Ino's turn to look crestfallen as Sakura shot her a triumphant look, seeming much more pleased with her own teammates. "These are all of the team assignments. All I can offer you now is the best of luck. I'm sure you will all make me proud, so good luck in your career as a shinobi." "He's late," the blonde whined as the second hour passed by. He tapped his foot vigorously and every once in a while stuck his head out into the hallway, hoping for a glimpse of their sensei. Hinata and Sasuke sat at their desks and offered their silent agreements with the boys' complaints. At first Hinata had felt that she was on cloud 9. It had actually happened. She had another chance to make it up to him for the other day. Guilt still racked her mind, as she had once again been too scared and nervous to approach the boy in a time of need. She didn't know the full details how the blonde had finally been allowed to graduate, but she was now determined to make it up to him. "Naruto-kun, please be patient. I'm certain there is a reason our sensei is late," Hinata said, trying to defuse the situation. The blonde pouted and Sasuke ignored his next round of complaining. His thoughts were preoccupied by how the hell the Dobi had done it. Sasuke was sure that Naruto had failed. He had seen him sitting dejectedly on the swing as he left the academy. So how he was here now, suddenly allowed to graduate? It made no sense to him. He supposed the Hokage finally needed a good sealing expert, and just let the blonde pass just to get him into the system. He was brought out of his musing as Naruto grabbed an easel and chair. He wedged the eraser between the doorframe and the door, as he chuckled at his own ingenuity. Naruto-kun, what are you doing? Hinata asked, moving from her desk for a better view. That's what he gets for being late, he replied triumphantly, moving the chair back to Iruka's desk. At that moment, a certain spiky-haired Junin stood outside. He eyed the piece of chalk in the doorframe and shrugged before opening the door. Let them have some fun before he crushed their dreams. So the four of them found themselves sitting on the roof staring with anticipation at the silver-haired Junin who stared right back. He had asked them to name off their likes, disliked, and dreams for the future, while avoiding answering the same questions. He motioned Naruto to go first. He puffed out his chest before declaring, "My name is Naruto Uzumaki. My likes are ramen, reading, creating new seals, my Jiji, Nei-chan, and Kitsune Bakatu I guess. My dislikes are people who put down others and tardy teachers," eyeing Kakashi who simply shot him one of his eye smiles. "My dreams are to one day become Konoha's next seal master and the greatest Hokage of all time. Datbeo." Kakashi only nodded as he turned his attention to the Hyuga heiress. "Gomen. My name is Hinata Hyuga. My likes also include reading, as well as flower pressing, in my family. My dislikes," her thoughts trailed off as she thought about the divide in amongst the Hyuga, "were rather personal to my clan. And my dreams are," she blushes as she shoots Naruto a quick glance, before holding her head high, "to unify my clan and become the next clan leader." Kakashi gave her a nod, before turning to the last member of the team. Sasuke curtly replied, "I don't really have a lot of things I like, but plenty of things I dislike. I don't really have a dream, but rather a goal. I am going to restore my clan, and kill a certain man." Naruto and Hinata felt uncomfortable as the atmosphere had taken a much more somber tone. Kakashi seized the opportunity to explain to them the survival exercise they'd be having. No matter how many genin teams he had failed over the years, he never got over the hilarity of their shocked expressions. The next day, Kakashi felt as if he was looking into a mirror of the past as he watched his latest team interact. Like he himself had done, Sasuke was leaning against the bridge ignoring all attempts at communication from the other two. Hinata was quiet and calm, just as Rin had been, and acted as the mediator between the two boys, although it was painfully obvious that she favored the blonde. Naruto was talking a mile a minute, while Hinata tried her best not to faint from the boys' close proximity. It was like seeing two people in one as Naruto painfully reminded him of both his late sensei and Uchiha teammate. He even had goggles just as Obito had. Kakashi sighed. He'd probably have to pass this team too. The backlash from the civilian council and Hyuga clan would be a pain in the ass if he were to fail the Uchiha and Hyuga heirs. He also felt that he had an obligation to his sensei to ensure that his son received proper training. However, he had his own code, and he was going to stick to it. If these students weren't able to determine the true meaning of the test, he would fail all of them. Perhaps he would take Naruto under his wing, but he would probably have to fight Kitsune over him. But he was getting ahead of himself. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his trademark orange book and leaned back against the tree he was hiding in. Wouldn't want to make them think that he could actually arrive on time. The breeze whipped through the training grounds causing Naruto to stop and sniff at the air. He scowled as he started scanning the tree line. Hinata noticed this and asked, "What is it, Naruto-kun?" He shook his head as he said, "I could have sworn I just smelled Kakashi-sensei, but I don't see him anywhere." He was surprised when he saw veins starting to bulge around Hinata's eyes as she scanned around the field. She stopped and turned toward the direction Naruto had previously pointed to. "He's over there sitting in that tree. What is he doing?" Sasuke piped in, curious what could possibly holding up their sensei. "He seems to just be sitting and reading," she replied. A tick mark formed on Naruto's head as he screamed, "Hyuga-sensei. Stop wasting our time reading your stupid books." A second late the spiky-haired appeared in a swirl of leaves saying, "Yo. You're late." Naruto's scream echoed across the training ground. "Nope. I've been here the whole time waiting for you to find me, and I got to say I'm a little disappointed." Even Sasuke sat up at this comment. "You never said anything about finding you," Naruto balked. "True, but you all haven't utilized any of this free time to do anything productive. All this time and you guys have just wasted it waiting around." Did it not occur to you to stretch or warm up before I got here? Maybe make some plans for the test. Even Sasuke looked away as the thought had not occurred to any of them. Kakashi sighed as he motioned for them to follow. As he reached a set of training posts, he reached into his bag and pulled out an alarm clock. It was time for the bell test to commence. A shinobi must be able to conceal their movements and hide efficiently. This lesson was engraved into every student in the academy. That class was covered more thoroughly than any of the other practical classes, such as throwing kunai and shuriken. The class had a midterm assignment of sneaking from one side of Konoha to the other without being spotted by the planted shinobi hiding among the civilians. Many students were eventually caught due to being careless or reckless. But not Sasuke and Hinata. Kakashi could still sense their chakra, but he couldn't see them at all. The fruits of their efforts were evident. Naruto, however, had decided to ignore that class. Apparently, the blonde boy appeared in a blur in front of Kakashi. The boy reminded him so much of his sensei, especially in that outfit. You know, compared to the others, you're not very bright. Why bother hiding? You're a Junin. No matter how well we conceal ourselves, you'd be able to find us no sweat. Now, you might be overestimating my capabilities a little much, don't you think? The blonde vigorously shook his head. Nope, Kitsune-san can find me anywhere, even when he's not trying. Even if you say you're a Junin, I'm certain your tracking skills up to par with him. Inu, the blonde finished with a mischievous grin. If Kakashi was surprised, he didn't show it. The blonde continued, by the way, I wanted to thank you for stopping those villagers 6 years ago. It meant a lot to me. Kakashi waved him off. Think nothing of it. It was the least I could do. Now, if you are finished moping about in the past, he began reaching into his pouch, putting Naruto immediately at alert. Shinobi Battle Tactics, Part 1, Kakashi said, sounding like a textbook. Taijutsu, the physical part. Taijutsu. Then why is he reaching for his pouch? Naruto wondered as he prepared to snatch a kunai to defend himself. He was caught off-foot as his sensei pulled out a familiar orange book. What are you? Naruto asked, confused. You can start whenever you feel like it, the Junin said as he flipped a page. Why are you reading that perverted book? Why? The silver-haired man asked. To find out what happens in the story, obviously. Don't worry, I'm sure your weak attacks won't be enough to actually harm me. Steam blowing out of his ears, the blonde rushed at the older man, throwing out a punch with as much strength as he could muster. He was bothered when the man caught it without even looking. The boy landed and threw a quick kick, which was just as easily blocked. The boy began a flurry of kicks and punches, all of which were effortlessly stopped by the older man. He's fast, Kakashi noted to himself, but extremely sloppy. He had heard negative things from the academy, but this was ridiculous. It was like the boy was incorporating different moves from a multitude of styles that meshed together in an unholy mess. He delivered a powerful kick to the blonde boy's gut, which sent him skidding back several feet. The boy rose to his feet and angrily formed his hands together in the tiger seal, and 10 shadow clones puffed into existence beside him. Many dipped into their pouches, drawing kunai, and charged as one. Kakashi barely moved an inch as he dismantled every clone that attempted to get near him. As he blocked one kick, he noted the original standing in the back watching the events unfold. So the loud brat actually knew how to use his head. He brought his thoughts to a close as he dismembered the last of the clones. He closed his book and the two seemed to just stare at each other. After a minute, the blonde brought his hands in another seal, summoning more clones. Kakashi was a little disappointed. He had been told that the blonde was quite imaginative. You can't just beat me with clones. At this rate, you'll never get a bell. The blonde chose to ignore the man's taunt and reached into his bag. Quickly, he threw down a smoke grenade, engulfing the area in purple smoke. Kakashi stayed put as he heard the clones beginning to surround him. He was about to reach for some shuriken to dispel them, when a pair of hands shot out of the ground and clasped onto his feet. Immediately, the clones charged as one. Using his superior strength, Kakashi wrenched himself free of the hand underground and jumped into the air, hearing the satisfying pops of the clones after he let loose his barrage of shuriken. As he soared out of the cloud of gas, he saw the original Naruto going through several hand seals. Even without his Sharingan, he recognized that jutsu and actually began to worry. What was Kitsune doing teaching that jutsu to an academy student? Naruto brought a hand to his lips as he exclaimed, "Kaden, Fox Hellfire." A stream of spiking, yellow fire streaked from mouth. It surged forward and engulfed Kakashi's body, setting him ablaze instantly. Cutting off the jutsu, Naruto found a burning log in the place of his sensei. Kuso. Kakashi watched the boy from the treeline as he desperately tried to find his teacher. At least Kitsune had been smart enough to make sure the blonde mastered the jutsu in parts. It may function as a simple Kaden jutsu in its base form, but its second or third level were no laughing matter. As the boy let out another curse, Kakashi smiled under his mask. So the prankster has a temper problem. This thought brought a smirk to his face as an idea popped into his head. He quickly set up a double-layered snare trap using a bell as the bait. The sunlight reflected off the bell caused the boy to stop. He immediately lit up and ran towards the bell only to stop a foot away. Kakashi frowned as the boy hesitated. Then he placed his foot a few inches away from its previous path and scooped up the bell. "Nice try, sensei, but you have to wake up real early to trick the number one prankster in Konoha." Kakashi dropped from the tree and studied the blonde. Once again, the boy was proving that as brash as he usually was, he could think outside the box and think clearly when he needed to. But he couldn't just let the blonde pass due to his own error. "Very good, Naruto, I'll certainly remember that next time." "Alright, well, I just keep this then." The blonde closed his eyes as he smiled. This instant was all the Junin needed. "Keep what?" Kakashi asked curiously. The bell of Cower. The blonde was shocked to find nothing in his hand. He began frantically checking the ground. "Oh, do you mean this bell?" Kakashi asked as he held up the lost item. "What? How? When did you give that back?" "I think I'll pass. You have to take the bell from me, not pick it up off the ground." Anger etched itself across his face, as he yelled, "Fine then. Time to pull out all the stops." He clasped his hands together and more clones burst into existence. Kakashi sighed, but the boy formed another hand sign and something was immediately wrong. The ground beneath his feet collapsed into a crater and he was finding it incredibly difficult to move his body. A gravity seal. When did he? Of course, when the clone burst out of ground to hold me in place. He already had a plan ready in case that one failed. The group of blondes jumped on top of him and pinned him down as the original whipped out a handful of kunai and flung them at the heap of bodies. Kakashi wasn't a Junin for nothing. Even under the influence of the gravity seal, he was still able to use his incredible strength to wrench one of the blondes off him and fling him into the path of most of the kunai coming towards him. He twisted his way out of the paths of the remaining kunai, ensuring that the clones attached to him would fall in their line of fire. Something vaguely familiar passed by his head, as he turns his attention to the original and everything seemed to stop. He watched awestruck as the blonde disappeared in a flash of yellow light that he had seen 100 times. He felt the presence behind and turned to meet a painful punch to his jaw. The blonde reared back for another blow, but bent over clutching his stomach. If he had eaten earlier, any and all contents of his stomach would have been vacated. Instead, he proceeded to throw up an unhealthy amount of blood. Still awestruck, Kakashi ripped off the seal with a mild Kaden pilot jutsu as he rubbed his jaw. That had actually hurt. More importantly, the blonde was more and more reminding him of the ghost of his past. That had been the Hiraishin no jutsu, no doubt about it. He really was the budding Fuinjutsu prodigy the Hokage had boasted him to be. Naruto squatted hugging his stomach as he tried to orient himself. "I feel awful." "You're about to feel a lot worse," a chilling voice said behind him. Naruto could barely register the words before a blinding pain erupted from his ass as Kakashi shouted, "Konoha's secret finger jutsu, 1000 years of death." The boy was sent skyrocketing into the air heading deep into the woods before a satisfying thud was heard from the clearing. Kakashi barely had time to think as a shuriken whipped past his face. This team was just full of surprises. It was time to see if Sasuke's performance could live up to Naruto's stellar showing. Hinata raced through the woods heading towards where Naruto had impacted. She had found him easily enough with her Byakugan, but Kakashi-sensei had really sent him flying. It took her at least 7 minutes to reach Naruto's location, and she didn't like what she saw when she arrived. Naruto had apparently crashed head-first through a thick branch and was now passed out on the forest floor. On his way down, the branches had torn up his face and now it was covered in some nasty scratches. She turned him over and carefully dragged him so that he was leaning against a tree. She didn't know what caused him to vomit so intensively after that technique, but she didn't wanting him choking if he had a repeat episode. She reached into her pouch and took out her special ointment that she had made herself and started working on fixing his cuts. As she worked on the blonde, dabbing the cream on his scratches, Kakashi could not help but be impressed. He stalked the pair from the treetops as his clone finished up with Sasuke. He couldn't help but be surprised by her medical knowledge. He was pleased to note that all traces of her shyness seemed to evaporate as she worked. She reminded him of a doctor working in an operating room. No emotions clouding your judgment and just focusing on your goal. Time to see if those Hyuga eyes were as good at detecting genjutsu as the clan claimed. Kakashi began to cast a light genjutsu with the intention of making it seem like Naruto's state was deteriorating, but the moment the jutsu started to seep into her system, she whipped around and noticed him immediately. Even without the Byakugan active, she still saw right through his genjutsu. He cut the jutsu short and just stared back at the girl. Now that took some serious chakra control and mental discipline. He was actually starting to like this girl. He dropped to the ground in front of them as Hinata took up a defensive stance over Naruto. That's some very efficient cream. Those scratches already look like they're healing. Any chance you're willing to tell me where you got it? I made it myself from herbs found within the Hyuga estate. Kakashi noted how her stance did not waver, despite her cordial tone. Really? Very impressive. Now then, what are you going to do? There isn't much time left, and you're the only one who hasn't attempted to obtain the bells. She bit her lip as she glanced between the Junin and the boy behind her. There was no way she was going to be able to protect him as well as try to get the bells. She was no fool. She knew she had no chance by herself. She needed help. She quickly flung a kunai at Kakashi before slamming a smoke grenade into the ground. He didn't even move his feet as he batted the kunai away, keeping his eye on the smoke. After the cloud settled, he wasn't too surprised that Hinata and Naruto were gone. At least she understood the point of the exercise, Kakashi thought to himself, but that isn't enough. All three of them have to work together if they want to succeed. Hinata raced towards Sasuke's chakra with Naruto's limp form on her back. With Naruto out cold, she was going to need the Uchiha's help if any of them were going to pass. As she entered the clearing, she was startled to find Sasuke's head sticking out of the ground. He shot her a glare as a blush erupted across his cheeks. Not a word, he muttered, clearly embarrassed by his helpless situation. She gave him a nod, and carefully set Naruto, before helping him dig himself out. Around this time, Naruto was finally beginning to stir, and when he did, he was met with a massive headache. What hit me? He said as he tried to regain his bearings. His eyes were blurry and he blinked a few times before his vision finally came back into focus on the side of Sasuke's head. He took one look, before bursting out laughing and falling on his back. Sasuke's face burned crimson in anger and embarrassment. Shut up, dumbass. Oh my lord, this is priceless. The blonde rolled on the ground clutching his sides, as Sasuke finally climbed free from his trap. He gave Hinata a thankful nod as he began brushing off his clothes. Excuse me you too, Hinata interjected. She felt her face heating up as both boys turned their attention onto her. Why had this been so much easier a minute ago? I don't think any of us are going to be able to get a bell from Kakashi-sensei on our own. Speak for yourself, the Uchiha cut in. I'm going off to find that man and take that bell. Hey, Naruto yelled, grabbing the retreating boy's shoulder, forcing him to face him. That was rude. Apologize to Hinata-chan. Let go of me. I don't want either of your help, nor do I need it. You can't do everything yourself, you jackass. Stop being so stubborn and just hear her out. And I just said I don't want your help. Why you little? Their argument was broken off as the sound of the alarm clock pierced across the training grounds. Time was up. Oh, Hinata. A familiar voice called sweetly from a tree near the training posts. Looking up, the genin saw their sensei lazily leaning against the tree trunk. Yes sensei, she muttered nervously. She did not like where this was going. Did you try to get a bell? He asked far too casually. Hinata took a step back. No sensei. Well, you know what that means, right? Hinata could only hang her head in shame as she accepted her fate. Kakashi had been more than a little disappointed by the results. There was no denying that these kids were talented. Skill-wise they earned their genin ranking with flying colors, and maybe could even put a few chunin to shame. As he went over the concept of the survival exercise, he could not help but notice the feelings of guilt that spread across the boys' faces. If they had tried together to get the bells, he was certain that they at least be able to get one of them. Alright, I'm going to give you guys one last chance. He left clear instructions to not feed Hinata for her failure to even attempt to obtain a bell, before disappearing with a shunshin. He now watched the pair eating quietly as the young girl's stomach growled, causing her to turn red in embarrassment. As if planned together, both boys offered their lunches at once. The three genin stared at each other in shock before Hinata shook her head. Please do not waste your opportunity on me. Too bad, Hinata-chan. I have to make it up to you for patching me up after I landed on my head. I also owe you an apology, Sasuke said as he offered her his food. You were the only one who saw the true meaning of this test. With all of us at our full strength, I'm confident we can get the bells from Kakashi. The blonde vigorously nodded his head in agreement, as tears threatened to fall down the young girl's face. Kakashi smiled behind his mask. They finally got it. Come on, sensei. Let us go. Naruto yelled as he struggled against the rope. Sorry. You and Sasuke admitted yourselves that Hinata was the only one who saw through the true meaning of the test. Meaning that you two are the ones who failed. If you want to get free, do it yourself. The blonde and black-haired boys were now tied up against the training posts as Hinata and Kakashi stood over them. Alright then, we'll meet back here tomorrow for our first real day of training. As he turned to leave, he gave one last look to Hinata. I know I just gave that whole speech about abandoning comrades, but try to overlook that right now. Don't help them get free. They'll never learn if you keep picking up the slack. She blushed at the compliment, as the Junin disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Hinata turned and bowed to the two boys, with a light smile on her face. Gomen, Naruto-kun, Sasuke-kun. But it appears I am less than trash. With that she turned and left, barely controlling her giggling. Hinata-chan. Please, don't leave us. It was another grueling 15 minutes before Sasuke finally freed himself from his bindings. Great job, Sasuke-tem. Now let me out. The blonde pleaded. Sasuke smirked and dropped his kunai just out of reach of Naruto's feet. A good shinobi should be able to escape from this himself. He strolled away as the blonde yelled at him with a plethora of curses. After a painstaking hour, Naruto was finally able to wriggle a kunai out of his pouch and cut himself free. Yata! He shouted to the air. He was about to head home, when he remembered he was about to forget something. He froze at the realization and frantically started searching the field wondering where he could have dropped it. Panic was starting to overtake him when a cool voice behind him called out, looking for this. He spun around to find Kakashi dangling his special kunai from his finger. Naruto couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Thank you, Kakashi-sensei. I don't know what I would have done if I lost that. He reached out for it, but was surprised when Kakashi pulled it away. I'm happy to return this back to you, but I have a couple of questions I'd like answered first, Kakashi said in a more serious tone. After he was sure the blonde understood, he continued, first off, let's start with the easier question. I assume Kitsune was the one who taught you that Fuinjutsu. The boy was quiet as he nodded vigorously, anxious to get his kunai back. I want to make sure that he fully explained how dangerous that jutsu can be. As Naruto tilted his head to the side, it was evident the blonde didn't know what he was talking about. I'm sure Kitsune has told you there are multiple steps to that jutsu, correct? Another nod. Good, I'm sure that he was going to fully explain it to you, but you are my student now, and I want to make sure you know how dangerous that jutsu can be. He brought up his other hand and raised one finger. That technique is Kitsune's signature jutsu and, even for Kaiden jutsu, it is rather dangerous if it gets out of hand. The jutsu has 3 stages, with each improving on the last. It appears you already have the first stage down. It releases a steady stream of fire with a yellow and orange hue. What makes this jutsu special is that the flames linger as long as the caster is conscious and can only be dispelled if he or she chooses to. He raised his second finger as he continued, the next stage is about increasing the heat and intensity of the jutsu. The jutsu changes from yellow to pure white as the heat is increased dramatically. At this stage, the flames can even be hot enough to melt steel. Just like the previous stage, the jutsu will not fade unless the caster wills it. The boy seemed excited as Kakashi lifted his third finger. Finally, the third stage, which is the most deadly of them all. This is why I am making sure you understand how dangerous that jutsu can be. The heat is turned up even more at this stage, turning the flames solid blue. What is incredibly deadly is what happens when the flames come in contact with something. While the first stage is about forming the shape and the second is about increasing the intensity, the third step is about changing the composition of the jutsu. I don't know the full details, but I do know that anything the flame touches practically liquefies on contact. The boy's eyes were wide in excitement at this. This can go for anything. Steel walls, masonry. He shot him a glare with his visible eye. People. The boy gulped as the realization hit him. He had used a jutsu that could do that on Kakashi-sensei. Thankfully, I am a Junin and that was only the first level of the technique, but imagine if you had tried to use that on someone who wasn't able to evade in time. Even if you were using the lower level of the jutsu, imagine hitting one of your teammates. You'd be panicking, making it harder for you correctly form your chakra to dispel the jutsu. He didn't have to say it, but he could tell the boy got the message. Be careful and don't use it in a spar against his teammates. Now, moving on. The more prevalent question on my mind is this. Once again he held up the kunai. Where did you find this? Naruto gulped as he answered, I found it out in the woods around here a couple years ago. I saw the seal formula and I just couldn't help myself. I've been working on it ever since. Kakashi could not hide his shock. Are you saying that you learned the Hiraishin all by yourself? The boy ate up the man's surprise. He puffed out his chest and said, you bet your ass I did. Although, there are still those drawbacks, he thought to himself with a wince. Kakashi was silent for a moment. Well, isn't that something else? Finally, he tossed the kunai back to the boy, who felt relief flood through his body as his prized possession came back to where it belonged. His relief quickly turned to shock as he watched Kakashi reach into his own pouch and pulled out an identical kunai to the one in his hands. The boy's head swiveled back and forth between the two as if he couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. Where did you get that? Naruto asked with a hint of awe, while his head began to overflow with questions. Were you the one to develop the jutsu? Kakashi laughed as he shook his head. Sorry to burst your bubble, but no. My own sensei was actually the one who developed the jutsu. He gave me this kunai as a gift the day I became Junin. I've always kept it with me as a reminder of him. Rubbing the handle one last time, he made up his mind as he offered it to the boy. Take it. It seems like it will do more good with you than with me. Kakashi said, chuckling at Naruto's star-struck expression. Naruto couldn't stop himself from shaking as he slowly took the blade from the older man's hand. Are you sure, sensei? His voice cracked. He couldn't help but run his fingers along the handle, feeling the grooves of the symbols etched into the wood. Kakashi shrugged. It seems to me that you'll get more out of it than I ever have. Naruto was silent before lunging at the Junin and wrapping around him in a tight embrace. Kakashi was surprised, but chuckled as he patted the blonde's hair. Thank you, the blonde whispered, almost muffled by the Junin's flak jacket. Don't mention it. Now, while I'm certainly impressed with how far you've gotten by yourself, I know from first-hand experience that those side effects aren't normal. The blonde slowly removed himself and seemed embarrassed as he wiped his nose before answering. I'm trying to figure that out. The problem is that the effects vary in intensity each time I do it. I tested to see if distance or chakra usage made the reaction worse, but it has never been constant. Kakashi nodded as he began to turn back towards the village. He had a meeting after all. Wait, Kakashi-sensei. The boy pleaded. I have to know. Who was your sensei? Is he someone I'd know? Kakashi chuckled as he glanced back over his shoulder. You might have heard of him. After all, he was the one that placed that seal on your stomach. Kakashi stayed long enough to enjoy the look of wide-eyed realization flash across the boy's face, before he shunshined away towards the Hokage's office. 2 hours later. This is just getting silly. I don't understand why you allow him to get away with this, Hokage-sama, an irate Kurenai said as she and Asuma stood before the Sandaime. Let's just say he's paying his respects to someone in his own special way, the Hokage replied coyly. What do you? Kurenai was cut off as a knock at the door signaled that he had finally arrived. Well, look who it is, Asuma said, rolling his eyes as Kakashi sauntered in. Couldn't you have hurried up to tell us that you failed them? You know we can't leave until everyone's reports are in. Kakashi barely paid him any mind as he stood before the professor. I'm happy to report that Team 7 passed with flying colors. Silence settled over the room. Kakashi couldn't help but be amused at the sight of Osamu's cigarette just barely hanging out of his mouth. Did they now? The Hokage asked with a knowing smile, folding his hands in front of his face. What can I say? The kids have talent, Kakashi replied with a shrug, before turning his full attention to the Hokage. I need to speak to you alone. Now. Ignoring the others in the room, he followed up with, without Anbu. Kurine couldn't help but shoot him a worried look, but obediently turned and left the room after a nod from the Hokage. She and Asuma shot the pair one final glance as they followed the Anbu agents out the door, which shut behind them with soft thud. After a moment of silence, Kakashi turned to his right and said, "You too, Kitsune." The boy appeared behind the old man's shoulder, his body tense and protective. The Hokage spared him a glance and a knowing look. Reluctantly, the boy stood down and offered one last bow before following the others out of the room. The silence that settled over the room was deafening. It was another minute before Kakashi spoke up again. So, when were you going to tell me we had another yellow flash on our hands? The old man chuckled as he palmed his pipe and produced a small flame from his finger to light it. I thought it would be entertaining to see your blind reaction. He paused and took a drag of his pipe before continuing. I'm honestly surprised he got a punch in. Kakashi eyed the glass ball behind the old man's desk as he rubbed his jaw. I was surprised myself, though he only landed it because of the shock value and the gravity seal. So, he really did discover it himself. The old man nodded, leaning back in his chair. I was just as surprised as you. It was about 2 years ago. I had known for a while he had been meddling with some secret project for some time, but when he came forward and showed me what it was, I was speechless. It was like watching Minato attempt the technique all over again. He softly smiled as a wave of nostalgia settled over him. He let the feelings reminisce for a few moments longer, before his expression took on a more serious look. However, I am concerned about the toll the jutsu is taking on his body. Kakashi nodded as the Hokage took another drag of his pipe. Minato had experienced some disorientation during the early stages of development, but afterwards his body adjusted to the feeling. The only time he experienced anything similar to what Naruto has felt was the first time he ever attempted it. That was before he adjusted the Nadime's seal. If Tsunade hadn't been present. He was silent as the implication rolled over both of them. The Hokage rose from his chair with a groan and turned to look out of the glass window over the village. What do you think the issue could be? Kakashi asked as he walked around the desk and stood next to the older man. Who knows? We are talking about a situation where a child, a talented child granted, but nevertheless a child, is attempting to recreate an extremely difficult technique that has stumped seal masters for years. It could be anything from the boy simply not performing the jutsu correctly to something in the seal fighting against him. Since he's come this far, why not let him look over the jutsu's source formula? The thought had crossed my mind, but we were never able to locate a detailed copy of Minato's version of the formula. To be honest, it is likely still locked away in the Namikaze estate. The place is blocked off by powerful blood seals, and Jiraiya refuses to help do anything about them. Leaving the only way in to be Naruto, Kakashi finished. Correct, and that would raise some difficult questions that the boy is not ready for. It is far too early. Besides, he has come this far on his own. Let's see if the boy is able to master it by himself. The more he experiments, the better understanding he will gain from it. The Hokage side then turned his gaze towards the west side of the village. Now I think we've discussed Naruto enough for one night. I'm curious to hear about your other 2 students as well. Kakashi closed his visible eye. Sasuke performed just as you'd expect from the Uchiha. Powerful fire techniques and superb taijutsu skills. I'd be willing to say that he is already Chunin rank in skill, but, the Hokage asked with a raised eyebrow. But, he needs to work on social skills. I can already see traces of a severe inferiority and superiority complex in the works. At least he sees his teammates as people he can stand. I intend to keep a close eye on that and make sure it doesn't develop into something ugly. The Hokage nodded. And what about little Hinata? Kakashi rubbed his head. Honestly, I didn't get a good look at Hinata's skill level. I can only assume that she is competent in her clan's taijutsu. She was the only one who saw through the meaning of the test and was preoccupied with aiding her teammates the entire time. I'd appreciate it if you could point me in the direction of some beginner medical jutsu. She has a knack for it. Coupled with her Byakugan, I see quite the surgeon in our future. The Hokage nodded as he soaked this in. She may end up needing more of your attention than the boys will. She's got a lot of trouble already piled at her feet. Kakashi warily stared at the old man. As her teacher, you are entitled to certain information. This is a secret to be kept between Hyuga and us. About 2 years ago, there was an incident beneath the clan's library. Said Hyuga unceremoniously flopped onto her bed, exhausted from the day's events. She had just finished talking with her father. His eyes had flashed when he heard the names of her teammates, and she could have sworn she had seen him sharply glance to a photo on his desk. Even after that display, he seemed pleased with the results of her report. Of course, she had left out the part of how she had been tied to the pole. She could only imagine the lecture and shame she would receive if he heard about that. She shifted her head into a more comfortable position, and was met by the small scroll sitting on her nightstand. She glared at the parchment until she noticed that something was different. Just like its inside, the outside had always remained blank, but now, there was a kanji for one written in black ink. She nervously took the scroll into her hand. She took a deep breath before slowly opening it. The once blank pages were now partly filled. She gazed across the title that read, The Tale of the Rabbit Goddess, Part 1. Hope you guys enjoy first part of this story. Do like, share and subscribe and do comment for second part.